I was in my 20s at the time, young and full of ambition. At the time, I was a raging alcoholic and a drug addict as well, so my memory is kind of hazy. I do apologize if most details aren't really there and major other events are left out, now sober almost a year. Anyways, I moved to Salt Lake City, Utah from Arizona, and I had gotten a job as a service tech. One of these jobs I went on was adding devices for equipment on a string of gas stations starting from St. George to Salt Lake, slowly working my way up the state to Salt Lake City, hitting every store that was needing devices. I cannot remember exactly where I was for the life of me, but I do know that it was somewhere between Richfield and another town. One of those small towns in between. I had finished a store late, about 10 or 11 p.m. or so, and wanted to get to the next town over so I could continue my work in the morning rather than drive 2 hours in the morning. As I'm driving down the highway, the Google Maps had told me to take this dirt road. It apparently led me to the town that I was working in next. Hesitant on why this was a route, I turned left into it in the end. A long dirt road with really nothing around me. Just pitch black darkness other than my high beams. It was about 5 to 7 minutes into my drive that my truck makes a sputter. It was an old 2008 work truck. It was terrible, to be honest, but I cursed under my breath and I put it into park. I lifted the hood and nothing seemed wrong. I have mild mechanic knowledge. And of course, I looked down at my phone and I see that I have no cell phone service at all. I check my work phone and it's the same thing. My only option here was to pretty much either wait it out until daytime or find a spot where I can get a bar of service. So I took option 2. Also, I usually carry firearms, but on this trip I had forgotten to bring one with me. Wielding a 10-inch pipe wrench and a Milwaukee flashlight, I walked into the desert determined to be rescued from the dark abyss that I was in. I should probably add too that this road was barely paved. I mean, you would not even take a truck on this, unless you had to, or it led to a specific point or something. I mean, I wouldn't really even call it a road, more of a trail really. Brush and trees lined up the trail like a natural wall, in fact. Now, I'm not an anxious or get scared very easily sort of guy. I grew up in Arizona, so I was pretty used to the dark quiet of the desert. Every step further from the truck, though, made me feel more tense for some reason. I walked for about 10 minutes until I heard laughing. Kind of muffled laughing. Something you'd hear out of a kid's show almost, right behind me. I swung around quickly, but nothing. My boots are sinking into the mud of the sand as I quickly just keep pushing forward. My heart is beating out of my chest like a ticking time bomb now, when I hear it again, but closer this time, louder, like it was 4 or 5 feet from me. I'm fully sprinting into the desert brush and sand now, eyes darting like lasers around me for somewhere to hide. I don't believe in paranormal or aliens or anything like that. I just figured that it was some deranged desert hobo or something, or some sort of a drug addict. With adrenaline coursing through me, I hid behind a rock that was nearby. Crouched down on my right knee, it was hurting because of all the rocks on the ground, but I didn't care. I knew that I needed to hide at this stage. The rock was one of those sort of 3-foot-ish mound rocks, I guess. The moon was shining bright, so I could see some things, and as I'm scanning the desert, I see a silhouette of 2 people running. I could barely make them out, but my eyes had been adjusted to the dark abyss now, and I forgot to mention too, after a while of this running, I turned my flashlight off not to give away my location. But I hear them talking, but I'm just far away enough to not be able to understand what they're actually saying. I literally sent out a message to my family and friends saying that I love them and that I'm sorry for anything that I had done wrong in life. It never sent because I didn't have any service, but It was a pretty traumatic event, and honestly, I thought that I was done for. I'm not a small guy, but not huge either. 5'10", 230 pounds, but I was unarmed, and really I was outnumbered too. And who knows how many others were out there with them and what they were planning on doing when I was found and helpless. So I waited. But they didn't leave the general location of where they were at. Scrambling, sort of around like mosquitoes, I guess. I had thought of the only thing that I could do, and so I grabbed 2 smallish rocks, and I'm not religious, but I prayed to God that night and threw them far in a direction away from the truck and the road. I heard them scurry away towards the noise, shouting at each other as they trucked through the desert. I then slowly crouch-walked through the brush and back to the truck. I forgot to mention this as well earlier, but I heard another set of stomping after the 2 had run, which meant that there were 3 confirmed people in this desert with me at this stage. As I got closer, I could see the truck, and honestly, when I saw it, it felt like heaven. Every step was closer to salvation, and my boots filled with sand with every stomp into the soft, cold sand, but branches and brushes stabbed me into my cargo work pants, and that was when I hear them tailing me. And for the love of all that was good, I could not turn around. I didn't even care to see who or what it was chasing me. I see the truck, and the truck driver's side door is completely open, which was weird because I had definitely left it closed. I checked the back seat and flung the door open more, and I flew into the driver's seat into the truck, and I did the most stupid thing that I have ever done, but the only thing that I could think of in that moment. I tried to start it. It took a couple of tries to start it, but eventually, thank the heavens, it cranked over and it let out a roar. I threw the gear shifter into drive, and I just drove out of there as fast as I could. As I was driving, hauling butt down this dirt road, I see hooded people hiding along the sides of the road, ducking as I drove by. They were scattering into the darkness like roaches in a kitchen. I rolled down the window and chucked my pipe wrench as hard as I could right at one of them and sped off. I watched it do flips right into where they were, and I yelled as I sped off into the pitch-dark desert night. Trails of dust followed the truck as I drove. There was silence, nothing but me and my heavy breathing trying to make sense of what the heck just happened. I drove until I had seen some town lights, and I was still sweating, white-knuckled on the steering wheel, gritting my teeth, going at least 75 miles per hour. I got into the small town at around 12 a.m. I threw myself into a local 7-Eleven looking terrified. The cashier asked me what was wrong, and I just asked her to call the sheriff's office. The sheriff was some burly-looking man. I'm covered in tattoos head to toe, so he treated me as a criminal almost myself, but turns out some hose had bursted, and I don't remember exactly what it was, but I got into town and called my boss, who was upset at the late-night call that he was receiving. He was shocked at what I was saying and said to call the sheriff's office and the mechanic or whatever. The mechanic guy was super nice and didn't even charge me for the repair in the end. The cops, well, they weren't much help. They basically looked at me like I'd been up too long and I was hallucinating, but I wasn't. They had asked me if I had taken any drugs or was drunk or anything, and barely wrote anything on the report. The mechanic was telling me, though, that he had never heard of something like this in that area. I stayed in a motel that night. I believe it was Motel 6, but honestly, I cannot remember. But as you can imagine, I didn't get a lick of sleep that night after I showered the dirt off of me. I ended up returning home early, and I quit this job later down the line for other reasons. I have since moved out of Utah to Florida. A photo that I had taken on the service call had come in and reminded me of this story, and I just had to share it. I had to tell someone. What do you guys think? Was this a robbery? Were they trying to hurt me, do you think? Did they see the work truck and say, oh, expensive tools and copper? Because honestly, I have no idea what that was. I mean, who's out there in the middle of nowhere like that, as a group in black robes, and what the heck are they doing out there? I'm just curious as to who you guys think these people might be, and why they were hunting me like an animal like that. Has anyone had a similar experience out there? Be honest too, and tell me, how close do you think that I was to actually being murdered in that desert? So my family and I had a weird night at the Great Wolf Lodge and wanted to check if anyone else had had a similar encounter at this place. We've stayed here 3 times before with no problems ever, but this was the first time anything like this has ever happened before. Like I said, we stayed at the Great Wolf Lodge and had a suite room. It was 2 conjoining rooms with 2 doors where you can lock the room from either side. The kids stayed in the kid-style room with the kids' bunk beds, and we stayed on the non-kid side room. We kept the doors open for both sides, and I made sure that the doors for both rooms were fully locked, including the lock where you can't fully open the door from the outside. At midnight, my son, 6 years old, ran into our room half awake next to our bed and was crying, sort of half asleep, sitting up right next to us. I asked if he had had a bad dream, and he said no, I really saw something scary in the room. It was apparently a big kid with a dark shadow walking around, and I ran right past him to get here, is what he said. Now, I knew that I checked that room before we went to sleep, and I figured that it was just his imagination, and so we went back to sleep. Then, 3 a.m., my wife sat up frantically looking around, and I asked what the matter was. She said, "Someone yelled, 'Mum, you honestly didn't hear that?' I told her no, I didn't. And she asked me to go and check on her daughter. I go to the kids' bunk bed den in the next room, and I found her out of her bed, bundled up in the corner, hyperventilating and full of tears. I swooped her up, and she started saying, 'Be careful, Dad, he's still in here.' I ran her back to our room and laid her on our bed with my wife and started searching the whole place. I turned all the lights on, and I checked literally everywhere, and there was no one. The doors were untouched, locks still in place, and the windows were unable to be opened. I mean, honestly, I was feeling the walls and the mirrors, looking for hidden doors and everything. I asked my daughter what she saw, and she said that she was laying on the top bunk and thought at first that it was me walking towards their bunk bed, but as I got closer, she realized that it wasn't me. She said that this person was taller and skinnier than me. It also had smooth white skin and a neck longer than a normal person's neck. Its skin was apparently paper white, smooth, and it looked naked but wasn't naked. It didn't appear to have any facial features. I asked if maybe it was a blanket or something, and she said no, its skin was smooth, without wrinkles, and it walked straight up to me and I covered myself. Then I watched it walk towards the door where your room is. She then said I came down the bunk when it walked away and peeked out the den window, but saw it still walking towards your room. So I hid in the corner where you found me, and I tried to stay quiet so it wouldn't hear me because I thought that it was going to kill me. But I started panicking and couldn't breathe good trying to be quiet. I was thinking of running out of the front door into the hallway, but I didn't. My wife then asked our daughter if she was trying to be quiet, then why did she yell Mum? Our daughter said no, I never said anything because I didn't want it to hear me and kill me. I didn't even hear our daughter say anything besides her hyperventilating as I got close to the bunk beds. I told my daughter to not mention what she had saw to our son, even after he tells us what he saw when he wakes up. I knew that he would be spooked if he found out that his sister had a similar encounter a few hours after him. Both of our kids consistently sleep in their own rooms since they were little, and they've never ran into any room in the middle of the night, unless our son had a rare bathroom accident, but At this point, we figured the kids' room was sketchy, so we ended up keeping them with us. Then closed and locked our room from that room, and it took an hour for my wife to fall back to sleep, but I was honestly spooked by this whole thing, so I left the hallway light on, and I figured that I'd just keep watch and stay awake until daylight at this stage. After she fell back asleep, the closet light that I had left on suddenly turned off, and it wouldn't let me turn it on, so I turned the bathroom light on instead. And then, a little bit later, I heard loud knocking on the conjoining room door that I had locked. I honestly get goosebumps, and I tried to convince myself that it was coming from the front door, but I knew that it was coming from that conjoining room. I debated whether to ignore it or check it. I felt vulnerable laying down without checking, so in the end I went and I checked, and there was nothing. Just an empty room, luckily still with the lights on. Half an hour later, my wife, still asleep, started freaking out in her sleep. She appeared to be having a night terror, which she had had before, 1 or 2 times per year in the past. I woke her up and she was frantic. She stood up and she said that she had dreamt that she woke up from a dream in the same bed. She went to the bathroom in our room and came out and ended up being stuck in the other room, locked in with this evil entity. She said that apparently I had locked her in the other room and she was knocking like crazy in her dream, trying to get back in on our side before the entity got her. Later in the morning, our son woke up and we asked him to describe what he saw, and he said that he saw what looked like a shape of a big tall kid with a long neck that was white or grey in colour and had a scary big dark shadow walking around the room. He said that it was making weird noises, like it was speaking words that he couldn't quite understand. He said that it walked right up to him in the bed and had big eyes that glowed like our cat's eyes look in the dark. As the sun came out, we got the courage to go into the other room and grab our belongings, and we left. The last weird thing, though, is that the room, it had a weird smell which wasn't present there the day prior. It smelled like a weird sort of incense was lit. Kind of reminded me of those stick incense that were popular back in the 90s. Personally, I never saw anything, but both of my kids, 6 and 9, who have never had encounters like this, they seem to have seen the same thing 3 hours apart from each other and had a similar description of it without knowing each other's description. The only thing that really differed in their descriptions was that my daughter said that it appeared faceless, and my son said that it had big glowy eyes and it was white or grey and not just white. However, my daughter did cover herself when it got closer, and my son allegedly watched it approach, so I don't know. I did, however, witness 1, both of my kids having a similar encounter, 2, my wife wake up to someone yelling "Mum", 3, the light turn off and turn back on, 4, banging on the conjoining room door, 5, my wife having a night terror where she was locked in another room banging on the door 30 minutes after I heard the banging on the door. And really, I've never been a big believer in hauntings and paranormal stuff, but after this, I am definitely left questioning it in my head and find myself thinking about it all the time. So I use both apps, Uber and Lyft, and I don't usually have any problems. The riders, they're generally pretty nice and or quiet, and honestly, I sort of enjoy giving rides anyway. Not a lot of money by any means, but enough in between paychecks at my big girl job to be enjoyable to do when I can. However, as I was cruising off from a ride, I get a new request for like $20 to $30. Not uncommon, but sometimes that means it's far as heck, and this one was only 45 minutes away, so not too bad. Plus, money and all that. So I'm driving to the pickup pin, and it's at a decently fancy Japanese grill and a kind of rundown dispensary as well. I park out of the way of traffic and hit arrive. 2 minutes, nobody. 3 minutes, someone walks up and she gets to my door. And here is where the scary stuff starts. She doesn't immediately open the door. Instead, she reaches for the handle, sure, but then she proceeds to sort of lean completely forward against my rear passenger door and just laugh. She's laughing into the paint, and then she bends all the way backwards to the point that her legs are like almost 45 degrees with her torso. She then opens the door, and apparently my last rider left something in the back seat, and she stops laughing and starts snickering. I hit her with the, "Hi, are you the rider?" and I do it in my forced masculine voice. In a creepily but sort of cutesy voice, she says, "Yeah, that be me. Someone done dropped a thing in your back seat, Mr. Uberman." I noticed this, and I asked to keep it in the front seat with me so I can return it to them later. "Oh, guess she must have left it on accident then." She stares not at me, but at the rearview mirror, and says, "Ain't you gonna call her?" I tell her that I'll do it when a request comes in to return it, like I usually do. Now, quick aside to explain the characterization of this woman that I've made so far is that I'm not going out of my way to be any kind of prejudiced or anything, but she legitimately spoke this way, and beyond just a country vernacular, she spoke as if she couldn't read well or something. And as someone who's worked with people with traumatic mental disorders, or even people who are severely mentally disturbed, or are neurodivergent, as a volunteer, I try my best not to be annoyed or to be a bad person in these situations. Anyway, we head off towards her destination pin 45 minutes away. First red flag, because the others so far could have just been a rider being weird or drunk. She asked me to stop at a UPS store on our way to her destination. No biggie, right? Here's the issue. She didn't specify where, just the UPS, and I opened up Google Maps to find the nearest one. She says, "Oh, you don't have to, but I have to get my friend out of jail. If I don't get this package, he's going to be there overnight." "Oh," I said, not getting what the package had to do with jail, but playing along. "Well, it's just he's going to be there all night if we don't get him out, and he's going to be killed by somebody. He in jail for killing." When I freak out visibly but not audibly, she then smiles and says, "Oh, we don't have to go there. Let's just keep going back on the road. I know you Uber guys got to make your money. Yeah, Uber drivers don't get a lot of money, do they?" Weird pivot, but we keep going, and I sort of nervous laugh and say, "Yeah, but I don't mind if you need to stop, you know." Wrong move. She continues to stare at me from the rear view every time that I glance back. We're on the highway before she says anything. "I like this car. What car this be?" I tell her, "Oh, it's nice, you like it?" Yeah, it's a pretty good car, I guess." She then nods and says, "Yep, it's a nice car." Then she turns to the empty seat next to her and literally begins arguing with the air. "No, it's his car. No, I don't think he wants to do that. Stop it." I say, "Everything okay back there?" "Oh, my friend just say this car is nice." "Oh," I say. I'm a bit freaked out by this, but I mean, it's whatever. People are weird, right? And I guess it's not completely off the cuff for a grown woman to have an imaginary friend. "Mr. Uberman, do you think it's okay to steal if you have to?" I just sort of shrug and go, "I mean, what do you mean? Like, if I was in a grocery store and wanted bread, I should be able to take it, right? Especially if I worked there." I shrug again. "I ain't no thief. It's just 'cause I needs it." She turns around and yells at my trunk. "I got money, right, Mr. Uberman? I got a job, so I got money." She's getting visually agitated now. Then she turns to the trunk and says, "What? No, you tell her to simmer down now. He's a nice man." And goes on this long rant about how she's got a vagabond and she's got a job, so she ain't poor or something, but that poor people like to pretend that they're not poor, switching from the seat next to her. Eventually she smirks, and it's kind of off-putting because, well, she's missing some teeth. And now, do I necessarily care if someone is talking to themselves in a lift ride? No, I don't judge people like that. Life's hard enough, right? But when her imaginary friend starts to sound like they want me to die, well, I do kind of mind then. I mean, I don't like being alive all that much, but I'm not going to let someone else decide that for me. Then, I'm driving and keeping to myself, and she smirks in the rear view and says in a scarily soft voice, "Aren't you sleepy? Aren't you hungry, honey? They say that you're really sleepy. Do you like boba?" I'm now gripping the steering wheel and avoiding eye contact altogether. "Oh, no, I'm okay. Thanks for the offer, though. I'll pay if we stop," she says in her sort of sing-song voice from earlier. "Let's stop. Maybe you could even pull over and nap for a bit." She's baring her teeth at this point, and I am literally internally screaming that I want this ride over ASAP. But $20 is $20, so, well, we keep driving. "Well, you killed her, so it is what it is," she says randomly to the trunk again. So, you and tell, she is apparently talking to dead people. I'm now even more apt to not stop, and we eventually get to a stop sign, and she stares at the headrest and leans forward. I forgot to mention too that all of this is happening while she's sitting directly behind me. She leans forward and sticks out one bony finger and pokes on my shoulder. "How does your body feel, Mr. Uberman? Huh? You sure don't want something to eat? I could feed you if you just pull over somewhere." So, it's like the 10th time that she's tried to get me to stop, and then she says, "He ain't sleepy, ain't he? He's gonna kill someone if we don't get some sleep. Someone's gonna die. He got two choices. He choose." I then ask, "Who's going to kill someone?" She looks aware and gets an angry face all of a sudden. Nothing, no one." So, eventually after being death stared at and her imaginary ghost friends talking about robbing or killing me, we finally get to her destination and she gets out. "Thank you for being so patient. Make sure you don't forget to, eat," she says with a deliberate pause. And then she comes around to my windows and smiles against the glass, and I drive home, and I didn't drive for Lyft for a week after that. It was a truly weird and genuinely terrifying experience to be a part of. When I was a teen, I got really into urban exploring at one point. At the time, the city that I lived in was considered a major city by the sheer fact that it was one of the only recognizable place names in the entire state, despite it only having about 250,000 residents, until people realized just how nice the area is. Now it's over like 1 million. But despite the small population size at the time, the city is about 30 miles in any direction from downtown, and at the time at least, there were a ridiculous amount of vacant properties, both business and residential. This meant that I had tons of places to explore. Thing is, though, is that all my friends were too scared to go with me more than once, and I was all of 16 and too chicken to go alone. I only did that once, and a homeless man was asleep under a pile of blankets that I stepped on, and I think that I gave both of us a heart attack, so I always made sure that I at least had backup, in case the next person whose bed that I stepped on wasn't so chill. Well, after months and months of not doing some harmless B&E and abandoned properties, I mentioned to my mother how I wished that I had braver friends because I noticed an abandoned farm on the route that my school bus took home and wanted to go and check it out one day. My mum is, and especially at the time, was an addict, bouncing around between substances like I do with what candy sounds best based on my mood. But she wasn't dangerous about it and was mostly fun. Until it's 5 p.m. on a Wednesday and she was out of her stuff and damn near breaking your door down to get money for more. But it wasn't bad most of the time. Point is that she was no stranger to breaking or bending the law, and had been a single parent of 3 for most of my life, and all of my younger brothers' lives too, so she was also not one to flinch at a little bit of confrontation or conflict. I waffled a bit, not sure if it was lame to bring your mum urban exploring or not, but I had been taking her truck anyway, so I figured that I'd let her come with me, and if it was fun, she could be my new urban exploring buddy, I guess. Well, we showed up to the overgrown driveway leading into this place at around 7 p.m, which was around dusk at that point in the year. We weren't planning on staying long, and I didn't know if there was even anything to see because the trees were so dense. The drive sort of meandered through the woods and over a creek for the better part of a mile, before it finally opened into a field. In the center, there was a barn. I was ecstatic upon seeing it too. Finally, something fun to explore. We parked the truck a little ways away, and I handed my mum a spare pocket knife, just in case, you know. She looked at it like it might bite her, but ultimately she shoved it in the front pocket of her jeans and took the lead. I followed behind her before catching up, and we walked around in a field a little, talking about how nice it would be to have a space like that instead of being in a cramped apartment all the time. But eventually I asked if she wanted to look in the barn, and she said yes, so we headed that way. The barn looked old and was starting to sink on one side. Very faintly too, I could make out the name of an old farm painted on the side, along with Horse Ranch. My mum was excited by this, saying that maybe we could find some cool loot. Horses, after all, are pretty expensive to properly care for, so maybe some rich person left behind a bunch of gear or something. The entrance was 2 large wooden doors that had to have been about 10 foot high and 6 foot wide each. One was already propped open, which made me both suspicious and happy that I wouldn't have to be the one to move it. The doors, they looked really heavy, and as we round that open door, my mum stops, gasps, and practically clotheslines me to get me to stop walking. On a stick propping the door open is a neon mascot head. That thing scared the life out of me, she declared, as if one could possibly mistake a bright yellow and blue canine head for an assailant. She moved closer though and tried picking it up by one dingy ear. "What the heck is this anyway?" she asked me. I'm in my 30s today, so I was raised by the internet and was able to recognize it instantly. "It looks like the head of a fursuit, like what furries wear," I told her. She got this look on her face, like she'd smelled something gross. "A what? A furry? Do they wear these things then?" And before I could answer, she yelled, "Oh, you're telling me this is like a sex thing and I'm touching it with my bare hands?" I laughed a little bit and said, "Yeah, it is for some people, but that the appeal seemed to be that no one knows who are behind the masks, kind of like Batman, I guess. But I actually saw something about leaving just the head someplace online the other day, I guess." I continued on. "It often means that there's been a furry party in this barn, if you know what I mean." She looked revolted and mimed gagging. I obviously was also just making it up, but I had just as little idea as to why it had been left there, just like my mum did. I tend to say whatever I think will be funniest in a given situation, and knew that her reaction to hearing that little bit of misinformation would be worth the lie. "Well, let's hope none of them are here now," she says, before turning to open the door and yelling, "Hey, if you're getting it on in there right now, I have my 16-year-old daughter with me, so knock it off." I suggested it may not be wise to be so loud, but she pointed out that we'd been hanging around for like half an hour at this point, so anyone with ears would have known already that we were there. Which was a good point, I guess. In any case, we shuffled past the dirty neon wolf or bear or whatever head and into the barn. It smelled of dust and rot, but in the way that a woodpile does, not in the way that a nasty home might. Soft evening light filtered in through the windows along the rafters. Stables lined the bottom part of the barn, and ladders on either side allowed access to the loft on which hay sat, decomposing. To our immediate left, there was a small room that resembled an office. Old logbooks and office supplies littered the floor, but there was ultimately really nothing of interest or value inside. As we walked across to the other side, my mother gasped again. "Do you see that?" she asked, sounding worried. I looked around for a person, my knife already out, and I witnessed her running forward. "Saddles! This was worth coming out here for. I bet that we can sell these on Craigslist and make a good bit of money. Here, help me get them to the truck." There were 4 total, heavy as heck, about 5 feet up the wall on hangers. I guessed, too, that that's why nobody else had taken them yet. After fighting the brackets they were placed on, we carried the first 2 to the truck, tossed them in the bed, and we went back for the next 2. As my mum was working on getting a 3rd saddle free, I swear to you that I heard something behind us. It was almost dark by then, and I was starting to regret not bringing a headlamp, but I turned around, trying to peer through what little light was left, and I saw movement. I froze, and when I saw nothing else moving, I hissed behind me to my mum, "Hey, I think someone's in here with us." She instantly stopped. The barn was dead silent. "You're hearing things," she said, or rather mostly said as a dark figure shifted in one of the stalls as she was saying it, cutting her off. She grabbed me and pulled me behind her so quickly that I didn't even realize what was happening. "I see you. Go away and leave us alone. We're leaving in a moment, okay?" She really wanted those saddles, enough so that she was even willing to try and convince whoever or whatever this was to leave us be until we had them. The person in the stall, they kind of laughed. Their voice was deep. I still couldn't make out anything though, other than that the person must have been wearing all black and was now engulfed in the shadow in this space, and that they didn't look much taller than I was. "No, I don't think so," they said, taking another step closer. My mum was practically snarling at this person by this point, gripping the knife that I'd lent her like she'd been getting into knife fights her whole life. "Stay back," she said, voice surprisingly calm and low. "My kid's here with me, okay? We'll leave now. You can have the saddles. If you hurt her, though, I'll fight you until there's nothing left of me." The shadowy figure laughed again. They were walking toward us again, slowly, menacingly, clearly to intimidate. "If you're threatening me, miss, we might have an issue." They said this, all the while shuffling our way. I was witnessing all of this, unsure of what to actually do, but knowing that we had to get out of there somehow quickly. I had been the one to drive us to the barn, and since I knew where it was, and given that I'd only been driving on my own for a few months at that point, I knew that I wouldn't have the skill for us to peel out of there and get away. As my mum was trying to rationalize with this figure, now only maybe about 100 feet away, I was working to get the truck's keys out of my pocket to hand to my mum, hoping that she would take the hint and run like heck out of there with me. But the figure, they noticed. "What are you doing, kid?" they asked me. "Better not be trying to do something stupid." I didn't know how to react, so I just stared, and the person went back to talking to my mother while casually shuffling forward. I was deaf to the world with just how intensely I was working to get these keys out without raising much suspicion. So I'm not really quite sure what they discussed after that, but finally I fished the keys from my pocket. I was still behind my mum, and I did my best to slide them into her hand and hope that she recognized the feeling of them, as the knife was still raised in her right hand. Her fist closed around them, and that was when I bolted. A millisecond after I began to move, she exploded forward, though, toward the person in the barn with us, and pushed them on their butt in the dirt. As the person was struggling to their feet, she yelled at me to run. And so, run I did, as fast as I ever had, as fast as I hoped to ever run. I got to the passenger side door about the same time that she reached the driver's side door. I had left the truck unlocked, so we both got into it without having to fumble with the fob to unlock the doors. My mum slammed the key into the ignition and shifted into drive, and we did a big U-turn through the field, and we got the heck out of there. I turned around to look through the rear window, scared that the person somehow ended up in the bed or was hanging onto the hitch or something, only to see them futilely chasing us as we disappeared back into the woods. The last thing that I saw before we got to the tree line was a man. White, dark hair, short, maybe in his 30s, raising a gun and aiming at us. I heard the shot, and then my mum started yelling expletives, and we bursted back onto the road like a bat out of hell. There was luckily no traffic on that road at that time, and so we didn't hit anyone, but we got home still panting and feeling like we were going to have heart attacks, and I told her what little I was able to see of the guy as she was checking her truck to see if there was any damage from us zooming out or maybe the gunshot. Thankfully, there was no damage except to our limbic systems, but she never did contact the police, both because we had been technically trespassing and because the substance abuse always had her paranoid that the cops would take us away. It's been about 15 years now, and we still don't talk much about it. I don't know if I've ever brought it up to my brothers, and the most that we've ever said about it is that the time that we were trespassing and got shot at, and pretty much we just leave it at that. I think that it goes without saying, though, but I have not been urban exploring since then, and I have no inclination to pick the hobby back up anytime soon. Those saddles, though, we did end up selling them both for $300 a piece in 2007. And so you win some and you lose some, I suppose. Quite honestly, though, I'm just happy that we both made it out of there without so much as a scratch. I was never really a person who believed in spirits, but I bet a lot of people feel that way, and roughly 16 years ago, I was freshly discharged from the Navy and decided to use my GI Bill and go and get some education. I decided to move to an outside area of Charlotte, NC. I moved in with 2 roommates in a 3-bedroom apartment. Both guys were pretty cool. One guy named Zach was from Altoona, PA. I became pretty close with him, in fact. We got a job at a restaurant together, and just basically hung out all the time, really. The other roommate was named Jamie. We never really hung out much because he was from Winston-Salem and always went home at any time that he could. But one night, Jamie wasn't there and Zach was at work. I had the day off and we planned on going to the local 1/8 mile drag race track for test and tune night. So I figured that I would just hang out to do some web surfing until it was time to meet up. And while I was on the PC, I heard a strange noise. It sounded like a single piece of loose leaf paper falling to the floor on its edge. Now, I know that no one was home, so it kind of freaked me out at first. I got up from the PC, which was in Zach's room. He was always cool with using the computer, and started to look around. I went down the hallway, checked the living room, the kitchen, laundry area, Zach's room, and my room, but absolutely nothing. So I go to open the door of Jamie's room, and I start to slowly open the door, and it was dark, when all of a sudden, I felt a physical push against my chest. I stumbled back as the wall behind me caught me. I started to feel a light sort of headedness, and everything in my vision turned red. This may have only lasted a split second, but I came to and my heart was racing. I quickly grabbed my keys and I just left that damn place, I was so freaked out. I got to the track early and I had to wait an hour or so for Zach to show up. When he finally arrived, I told him just as I'm telling you all now. He says to me how crazy that was, and he goes on to say that he's been noticing some weird things too with that room. Like another day before this, he said that he went in there for something. I cannot really remember what it was, but he saw what looked like glowing claw marks in the closet. How true that is, I don't know, but the next day after school, we went home and Jamie was there. We both stood there and told him our stories, and this guy then says, ever since my grandmother passed, something has been following me. This isn't the first time that I've heard this. Obviously, this freaked us out, and the next day when we came home from school, all of Jamie's furniture was now gone. Everything. In fact, we never saw him or even spoke to him again. He owed us some rent, and we tried to get a hold of him, but we just never did. Finally, his father sent us a check in the mail which paid his portion of the rent, and to this day, I have never heard from him again. Eventually, I moved into his room because it was bigger, and I never experienced anything else ever again. This was during my tenure in Japan, during my first teaching job. I was still learning the language, and could only really understand or speak a little bit. I also had an international driver's license at the time, having failed the local driving test multiple times before passing. I had used a whole month's paycheck to buy a small Kia car, think a small box car, a Spiano Mazda to be precise. Every day I drove to this particular preschool where I taught the 3-year-old classes English. It was usually a very boring and uneventful drive and lasted 30 minutes, but this time it left me with nothing short of PTSD. So, I was running a bit late and I was driving a bit faster than I was supposed to be going. I didn't want my strict boss to yell at me. I was in the right lane, which was the fast lane. I rarely drove in that lane because I just enjoyed the scenery most of the time, but I really didn't have time for it that day. I noticed that my lane was disappearing and I saw that there was a space in front of the car next to me. So I put my foot down, going even faster than I was supposed to, and I get in front of this car. I was a whole 2 car lengths in front of him, in fact, and except for the speeding aspect, I followed the rules of the road. But that move to get in front of him apparently upset him so much that he followed my car for 20 minutes to my workplace. I didn't notice as I was trying to quietly urge people to go faster, but as I pulled up, I noticed that my usual space was filled. I was rather upset at the time, but I would have been in a worse situation if I was in my usual position, so I'm grateful for that. The parking lot was actually just an abandoned gas station outside of the school, so I parked my car and then get myself situated to get out, grabbing my purse, phone, and mentally preparing myself for the next 3 hours. What I continued to not notice, though, is that the man's car following me into the parking lot, and it parked behind me. In all honesty, I'm not proud of any of my decisions in the next 30 minutes of my life, but he appears at my window, and as all the kids and their parents are arriving, I just presumed that he was a parent. I rolled down my window to see what he wanted. I, a 24-year-old female at the time, and was just trying to be a professional teacher to this random father of my student. Unfortunately, though, he wasn't a father, but instead a complete and deranged lunatic. He randomly started screaming at me in a language that I didn't understand in front of 2 to 4-year-olds and their parents. I only understood that he was angry about my car and that he was calling the police or something. I understood the word police, and I obviously should have pretended not to have understood that word because now he was screaming at me about me being a liar and that I understood Japanese. Again, out of the words I learned from watching anime at the time, I learned police, Japanese, liar, and angry. So that's literally all I understood from this very unhinged man. Still screaming at me in a parking lot where toddlers were literally staring at him now. He demanded that I follow him across the street, and so I agreed. For quite a few reasons. One, I wanted to get him away from the kids ASAP, but two, the parking lot that I was in was not going to give a quick getaway if I needed it. The one across the street, however, was basically a big supermarket, aka an easier way to flee. And three, I wanted this psycho to get back into his car. 4, too, that's apparently where he sent the police to arrest me for trying to kill him, according to what I was told later. I drove to the supermarket and kept my car running. He parked 2 car rows ahead of me, glaring at me, and for the next few minutes I awkwardly just sort of sat there. The police came and he goes up to them demanding that they see the video. One goes to watch while the other comes to my car to get my version of the story, and to verify my license too. After getting the all clear, he asked what started the situation, using Google Translate. I replied that I didn't know, that the other driver just sort of randomly started yelling at me at my workplace. The officer walked away and spoke with his partner at the psycho's car. They talked with him, promising to deal with me. One officer asked if the psycho had assaulted me. Honestly, that possibility hadn't even occurred to me before that moment, that this very unhinged person could have started an altercation. I replied that no, he didn't, and I just wanted him to go away. They walked back over to the psycho again and promised to get rid of him. I texted my boss the situation because now I was officially missing class. Psycho drives away, and then they come and stood protectively next to my car. After waiting 10 minutes, they said that I was free to go. No ticket, no fuss, no arrests on my part or the psycho's part. But my question is, why did I just have to deal with this situation for it to be over with so easily? I was also still freaking out and really not looking forward to the next 30-minute drive home where the psycho was headed. I realized on my way home, though, that I noticed when cars were behind me for a while, and I also noticed that I was freaking out because they were heading in the same direction as me on a road with only a single lane per side for like 5 minutes. So, thanks, psycho. I now freak out when someone literally drives back into town behind me. I couldn't shift the feeling of freaking out when someone drove behind me the whole time that I was living in Japan. I was able to increase the amount of time someone could drive behind me before freaking out, but it just never went away completely. Eventually, I would make a random turn somewhere, pull over, and I would always try to calm myself down. I still am wary when people follow behind me for longer than 10 minutes, but now I can differentiate between them just trying to get to work versus becoming round 2 of my literal nightmare that day. It was a scary experience, and it was very embarrassing too. One that I really hope to never repeat. Until I was 5 years old, my parents and I lived with my mum's side of the family. The house had my 2 uncles, 2 cousins, my aunt, and my grandma. Sometime after my 5th birthday, I think, we moved in with my dad's side of the family. But every Friday I would come to my grandma's house and I would sleep over. I would sleep with my grandma in her room too, since the other rooms were my other family members and I would fit better with her. So, I don't know exactly when this started happening, and I started this story because it didn't just happen once. It happened multiple times, and it was always the same experience. As a kid, and still now, I struggle to fall asleep at night, and usually just sort of lie down for minutes to maybe even sometimes hours before I can finally fall asleep. My grandma, though, she could easily fall asleep, so she would always fall asleep first, and I would just sort of lay there. Now, randomly, and only when my grandma would fall asleep, I would hear a voice somewhere ahead of me in that room. The bed faced towards her bathroom and closet, which both were behind doors. It would always be the same words, though, of hi or oh hi. It was always a whisper, and it was always in that room. And I can assure you that it was not in my head. I would complain to my family. My grandma and aunt would use the excuse that in my grandma's bathroom there's a hole or a vent that connects to my older cousin's room, who would always bully and mess around with me. So they assumed that they were trying to scare me. But I remember that voice that I would hear would just not stop, even if I would ignore it. I could close my eyes and try to sleep, but it would constantly happen. Every few seconds, these words, I would hear them whispered to me. I ended up complaining so much that my mother just told me to not sleep in there anymore. So I stopped until around the age of 10 when I started sleeping over again. But I instead slept on the inflatable mattress in the living room with a cousin who moved in after I had left. And nothing ever happened there, which was odd. But what makes me believe that something really is in that room is other experiences from me and others too. So around 2021, we had gone to my grandma's house for her birthday. My brother was born recently and just a few months old, so since he was an infant and had a diaper, we changed him often. I ended up going once with my mum to help change. We took him to my grandma's room where, as soon as we put him down, he started crying and he just wouldn't stop, and I didn't think much of it until we stepped out and he stopped crying. Later on, we did another change in another room and he didn't cry at all, which, again, I just sort of noticed this. Maybe I'm too skeptical and was just sort of forcing a reason into little things as well, but I know that there's belief that babies can see stuff until their first tooth or whatever, which I can't back up obviously, but this just sort of strengthens my belief that there's something in my grandma's room because he would only ever do that in that room. Also, around 2023, my grandma was taking me to soccer practice when my parents were out on a trip, and we talked a bit, and I remember the first time she took me, and we were talking about me being into the paranormal and writing fictional stories about it and all that, and I told her what inspired me to do this is the voice that I would always hear in her room, that I would always complain about. She remembered and ended up telling me some stuff that she apparently experienced. One of my two older cousins that lived there went out to the Navy as well, and the one that stayed moved to the room next to my grandma. He told my grandma that one night he heard banging in her room through the wall. He went to her room and he saw a portrait on the wall on the floor, and it happened more than once in the same night. He would hear it, fix it, and then it would be back on the ground again. But the weird thing is that it's those portraits where you sort of have to lift the portrait up and out, if you know what I'm talking about, to get it off the wall. Another experience is from my grandma, who said that she just simply heard a kid crying one night. All of this together, it makes me believe that something is in that room and is what made me a believer in the end. I know it's not a crazy story and fairly small, and some of it could be explained by something else, I admit, but with everything together, it always makes my belief just stronger. I had lived in this apartment for a total of 3 years. For the first year and a half, I had lived there with my ex-husband. My best friend found the apartment for me. Her sister was breaking her lease and was looking for someone to take it over. I was desperate to move out of my husband's mum's house and for us to finally have our own place, and so we decided to take the lease. We divorced, though, about 1.5 years after having moved in. Now, while my ex lived there, nothing much happened except for one thing neither of us could explain. For some context, the layout of the apartment was as follows too. It was on the second floor, and as soon as you walked into the apartment, on your right was the kitchen, which was open to the living room. And as you walked past the living room, you'd enter a long hallway which was about maybe 20 feet long. On the left wall of this hallway were 3 doors, 2 leading to 2 bedrooms, and the last door on the left was to the bathroom. At the very end of the hallway was a final door, and it led to the laundry room. So my ex had a gaming computer situated in the living room at one stage. I used the spare bedroom as an art studio, and I had my own little desk in there with a laptop to watch YouTube while working on projects, etc. My ex taught me proper computer etiquette, I guess you could call it, so I always made sure to shut my computer down and didn't just leave it on constantly. My ex had 2 cats, and anyone who's had cats knows that they love to jump onto surfaces and cause trouble. And so to avoid this, I always kept my studio door closed when I wasn't in there, that is. Now one night, I remember waking up to what sounded like my ex's gaming computer playing some sort of video. I assumed maybe one of the cats had jumped onto his modem and accidentally turned it on, and so in and out of sort of grogginess, I brushed it off and just sort of drifted back to sleep. However, upon my ex having woken up for work early in the morning, I realized that it had been my laptop that had been turned on, because I realized that he was going into my studio to turn it off. I immediately felt a bit of a ping of anxiety go through my chest because I really had no idea how that computer could have possibly been on, and on top of that, playing a YouTube video. I mean, first of all, you needed to enter a passcode for the computer. Secondly, I know for a fact that I had turned my computer off, as I always remembered to. And finally, my studio door had been closed for hours before we even headed off to bed. If I had by chance left my laptop on, loudly playing YouTube videos, we would have heard it before drifting off to sleep as well, and we would have turned it off for sure. So neither of us could really explain that, and it was pretty strange, but nothing really happened after that, and so I guess we just kind of forgot about it and thought that maybe my computer was somehow acting up or whatever. However, once we divorced and my ex moved out, this was when things really started to get crazy. So my ex took his cats with him, and it was just me and my dog at the apartment. Just for future context too, my dog always slept in the bedroom with me. She never slept out in the living room throughout the night. And I always got the creepy feeling that I was being watched. I never felt 100% at ease while living there alone. I have also never smoked cigarettes, and my friend's sister hadn't ever smoked cigarettes there, and the smell of stale old cigarettes would always come and go randomly. Normally I would smell it in the laundry room, but sometimes I'd smell it as soon as I'd walk in the door or in the hallway even. I could never explain where the smell was coming from though. The hallway in the apartment always felt incredibly creepy. My friend told me that every time that she came over there while her sister had lived there, the hallway always gave her the creeps too. But her sister had lived there for like 10 years and swears that she had never experienced anything there. In any case, about 6 months after the divorce, I started dating my current boyfriend, and sometimes he would spend a couple of nights over at the apartment with me, because quite frankly I really didn't like being there alone, and he didn't like the idea of me being there alone either. Things had been happening that honestly had me wondering if someone was secretly living in my apartment. I lived in a really bad area, and there were a lot of homeless people around, so maybe one had snuck in was my reasoning. I didn't really have any other explanation at the time because I'd hear things rattling around in the kitchen at night while laying in bed. But the most terrifying thing happened while I was in bed alone one night. So I have a Great Dane, and she sleeps on her own futon bed, which sat at the foot of my bed. She is super laid back, and when she's asleep, she's pretty much out, to be honest. Nothing really wakes her up, especially in the middle of the night while we're both asleep. But on this specific night, I woke up to her growling at something. And I mean, she never does this just randomly in the middle of the night like that. It was about 2 a.m. and she was looking directly into the hallway and she was super alert, sitting up and baring her teeth. I have literally never seen her do that before too, and that alone sort of scared me a bit. So I shushed her so that I could try and listen, and when she went quiet, I heard the creaking and shuffling of footsteps coming down the hallway from the living room towards my door. I was absolutely shaken with fear. I was fully believing that somebody was in my apartment. My heart was pounding out of my chest. I was so terrified that I slowly climbed out of bed and grabbed my pistol, which was under my bed. I listened a little more and heard the footsteps proceeding closer, and my dog continued growling. I walked towards my doorway. The door was open, and I hate to say that I fully expected to see someone in my hallway, the person who I suspected had been living in my apartment secretly for months now. But as I turned around my doorway, there was absolutely nothing. I was relieved for a minute, but then it hit me to check the rest of my apartment. After finding nothing, I made sure all of my windows and front door was locked. They already were, by the way, but I think it goes without saying that I had quite a lot of trouble sleeping the rest of that night. My boyfriend didn't experience near as much as I did, but he believes me and has had some experiences of his own too. Randomly waking up in an absolute panic in the middle of the night for no reason, with the feeling of like absolute dread, like something is in the room with you and about to hurt you. It all came full circle though when one night I heard what sounded like the silverware drawer opening suddenly and then slamming shut while in bed with my boyfriend. I didn't even get up to check it and see what it was, because at this point we were really just trying to ignore everything. However, that morning I was going down to the first floor to get my mail. I lived above a restaurant and I was friendly with the owner, but we never really spoke too much. I happened to run into him and we started some small talk, and I told him that I was moving. And he said, "Wow, really?" And then he asked if I had ever experienced anything while living there. At first I thought that he meant just with people in the alley, like harassing me or something, and I said, well, sure. I mean, people go through my trash sometimes. But then he stopped me and he said, "No, I mean things you can't explain happening in the apartment." My face went white, and I told him as a matter of fact, yes, and I asked why he was wondering. He then told me that he had customers and employees who had experienced things and that they had seen apparitions in the restaurant apparently. He said that he had experienced things like cans of food flying off of shelves and just the really heavy, eerie feeling of being watched. He also told me that apparently the tenant who had previously lived in the apartment, which was in the same building as mine in the front, had mentioned to him that he had used a Ouija board in his apartment once. The owner of the restaurant had a self-proclaimed medium come to get a reading of the building, and she said that she felt energy vortexes in its basement. I don't know what that means, though. To be honest, hearing all of that was a lot because I had spent so long just trying to shrug off everything that had been happening and just sort of ignoring it all, but hearing this made me realize that maybe it wasn't all just in my head. The last thing that I remember experiencing, though, was one night when my boyfriend and I were getting ready for bed. I was already in bed and he was brushing his teeth in the bathroom down the hallway. My dog was coming into the bedroom to get onto her bed and I said goodnight to her. My boyfriend then came into the bedroom and asked, "Who were you talking to?" I told him that I had just said goodnight to the dog, and he said that he was asking because he thought that I was on the phone because he heard goodnight said out loud twice. I told him, though, that I only ever said it once, and it was a bit weird. Anyway, thankfully, I moved out shortly after this, and I never went back. Last October, my boyfriend bought a Ouija board for Halloween off of Amazon. We tried it the night that it came in the attic, the basement, and my bedroom. Nothing happened, so we just put it back in the box and it sat in my closet till a few months ago. My best friend was staying overnight as there was a really bad storm and she lived in a trailer, so she came over just to be safe. We did nothing for the first good portion of the night, but around 3 a.m. we all had the idea to try the Ouija board again, especially because I thought that it was just a stupid game and was very skeptical about the paranormal. But this time we lit candles and all sat on the floor in the complete dark, and the only source of light being from the candles that night. We all spun the planchette 3 times and collectively said, "Hello, Ouija." We then asked if there were any spirits that would like to communicate with us, and the planchette rather quickly moved to yes. We asked the basic questions about the spirit, like what was its name, how old is it, and if it's good or a bad spirit. When we asked for its name, it went to Q, and then multiple numbers. I don't remember the exact numbers, but weird, right? We asked the same few questions multiple times, and no answer was really consistent. Also weird, but whatever, right? We asked questions for what had to be at least 2 hours, as me and my friend found it insane that a spirit can communicate through a piece of wood like this. By the way, none of us are the type to mess with each other by moving the planchette, and we even took turns putting one hand behind our backs and asking what number that we were holding up. The spirit giving the right answer every time, and asking it personal questions the others just would no way know. At one point, though, we asked the spirit to prove itself, just to be 100% sure that none of us were messing with each other, like touching us, moving an object in the room, anything really. A few seconds later, we all hear a faint yell that sounded like it was downstairs on the stairs. Nobody was downstairs, as everyone's rooms are upstairs, and it was super late. This is when we 100% knew that we were communicating with something. My best friend asked something along the lines of if she was going to have kids or not. The board then went back and forth between M and A, spelling out the word mama repeatedly. Now, I don't remember the last question that was asked, but on the last question, right before we ended the session, it kept going to Z and O over and over again, spelling Zozo. My boyfriend then abruptly told us that we needed to say goodbye, and we did. After we ended the session, my boyfriend looked somewhat shaken up by this. After multiple times of me asking what that was about and what was wrong, he then told us about his experience that he had with a Ouija board when he was around 12. When he would play, there was a spirit who called itself Zozo. It would pretend to be a good spirit or impersonate other spirits, is what he said. But Zozo feeds off of people's fears, which explains answers that I was getting about my father passing. I had asked it if my father was going to be able to walk me down the aisle, and it quickly went to no. I ended up doing plenty of researching after he told me that, and got pretty creeped out as I believe we contacted something very evil and dark, a spirit apparently not to be messed with. I also learned in my research that Zozo also refers to itself as Mama, going back to the questions my best friend asked and the planchette moving to MA repeatedly. The next few days for me were filled with unusual anger as well, and just negative emotions in general. The day after we played, my boyfriend got fired from his previous job, which I don't know if that correlates to the Ouija board or not, but it was a bit weird. In the end, we decided to throw it away near an abandoned building in the field right by it. A week or 2 later, we went back for whatever reason, and it was gone. I went from being skeptical about even the existence of spirits, and thinking that Ouija boards were a joke, to genuinely being scared of the dark for weeks, and being fully convinced that there are otherworldly things walking amongst us that we just cannot always see. I'd love to hear if anyone else has had any similar experiences with the board, and what that was like for you. I just know that I will never touch one of those damn things ever again. In pursuit of being around more like-minded people at the time, in 1965, our mother moved us to Carmel, California. She was enamored by the pictures in the magazines of Carmel by the sea and the pure white sands on the beach and all that. Plus, she already had some friends from her church that lived there, so they could show us around. She answered an ad in the paper for this big, beautiful house owned by this lady who was renting her home for a year or so while she traveled abroad. When we arrived at her house, the lady told our mother that she just wasn't interested in renting her fully furnished, beautiful home filled with lavish things to someone with children. But there we were before her. She was so charmed by our mother, though, and blown away at how incredibly well behaved all 6 of us were, that something shifted inside of her. She said that she had felt overwhelmed by the feeling that the house needed children's laughter, and that lady not only rented her home to our mother while she was away, but she also dropped the price of the rent 3 times lower than it was posted for. We lived there for a little bit over a year. Eventually, our mother found out through a friend of a friend with whom was in the real estate that there was a house that offered an incredible deal that she just could not refuse. It was a 3-level house with an attic, and the price was perfect. Nothing down, and she was to just start paying the mortgage, and the house was hers. Mum was so excited. This was the first house that she was able to own by herself, so she didn't even question why it was so cheap or why it was such a great deal. She just marked it off as being another blessing. I guess you would consider this house as being a bit of a townhouse, very tall and slim. There was a mostly finished basement that became our mother's bedroom, and of course I slept in her bed as well, and then there was the kitchen and the living room on the next level up. Above that were 2 bedrooms, one for my brother, and the other one was for my older sister, Linda, and also sister Melanie. The attic was where my 2 sisters, Charity and Rachel, stayed. And strangely, the staircase and the door to the attic, it was also in my brother's room. I have no memory of these events, so after separately interviewing 3 of my siblings and what I was told by my mother and elder sister before they passed, this is what they recalled. Things were all right for the first few weeks, but then everyone in the house started experiencing signs of something being off. Items disappearing when you know it was right there, hearing their names being called out, noises like footsteps running up and down the stairs, and my siblings were being sort of pitted against each other. Our mother was so tired after work that a lot of this just didn't get brought up to her. That is, until things were being thrown, along with terrifying visits in their bedrooms. My brother, with the door to the attic in it, said that he didn't know why, but the attic was always like 60 degrees, even during the hot summer. He said that one night the family cat, Icket, was sleeping on his bed, and he was just at the stage of falling asleep when the cat jumped up and arched his back and sort of hissed at something. He looked in the direction that the cat was looking, and down the steps from the top was a dark floating orb, or a blob. He said that he ran downstairs, and apparently it followed him almost on his heels. Our mother loved hanging pictures down the staircases and in hallways and all that, and he said that this thing moved swiftly enough down the staircase and that some of the pictures swung and others even flew off the walls and crashed to the floor. He then ran downstairs to our mother's room where we were both sleeping, and he woke her up. She told him to see himself surrounded by white light and to say the universal word for a higher power, which was Om, over and over again. He said that he didn't want to leave her room, so he made a spot that night and laid on the floor next to my mum's bed and didn't sleep a wink all night. He told me that many times something would like fly across the room at you. Cabinets were left open, or at times rattled. He said that there was this one time that he was sitting in the living room and a cat figurine jumped off the mantel and literally hit him hard in the head. They all said that this had almost been an everyday occurrence without notice, in fact. Everyone else thought that there was something off with our sister Charity as well. She stayed in that cold attic with Rachel, and Rachel said that it was really creepy. Charity started isolating herself from everyone, wanting to be alone. She found a crawl space in the walls and would play in there with her many mice for hours at a time. She'd go outside looking up at the trees and hold conversations. She felt like the leaves were answering her or something. When all the kids walked to the school too, she never really wanted to make that long walk on that country road with her siblings, but always preferred to walk alone. She told me that lots of the time in that house it felt as if her memories were sort of shrouded by fog, like she was there but wasn't at the same time. Charity shared with me that she wished that I hadn't asked her about those times because she had almost forgotten about that house. She said, though, that it might have been possible that something was wanting her to be alone, and she was only 12. Our mother did everything in her power to cleanse that house. Salt in the corners, sage incense, priests, and even high-ranking people in the occult at one stage. Everyone was always hopeful for a while, but it just seemed like every time there was a cleansing that it was shorter between the time of the next occurrence. She was always doing things to make extra money, and at one point she even sold wigs for a bit. It went quite well in the 60s. She would hold these sort of wig parties at the house, and this was the time that Charity said that she felt the closest to our mother. Charity would style the wigs for her, and when they were sold, she was proud. It was sort of their special thing together, I guess. Well, at one of these parties, Charity was upstairs in the attic with her mice. She took such good care of them, and after all, they were really her only friends. So she took one of them out of the cage and set him on the table in front of her. She said that all she did was turn her head and tilt down to pick up something on the floor next to her chair. I mean, not even a moment had passed, and her mouse had just disappeared off the table. And she said that she didn't even have time to search before she heard screams coming from the living room 2 flights down. She said that Mum was furious at her. She was telling her to come downstairs immediately. After she arrived, she was stunned at what she was looking at, because there was her mouse, the one that was upstairs on the table, not even 2 moments prior. She knew that there wasn't enough time for him to get down 2 flights of stairs and end up on the top of a wig box in front of my mother's potential customers. But man, Mum was mad. All of those ladies left after freaking out and screaming. That was a big deal back then too. Word of mouth was everything, and that was a big tarnish on our mother. Mum never disciplined us like other parents though. We were well behaved because she worked so hard for us that we didn't want to disappoint her. Needless to say that Charity was crushed by this. Later, Charity had one of her mice that had babies in a secure locked cage with no possible way in or out. And later that night, in the AM hours, a wild rat came out of the walls and made its way into the locked cage and massacred the mother along with all of her babies. She loved them so much and she was devastated. But she felt like whatever was in that house was doing this because that lock on that cage was just sort of laying there. And after what happened at Mum's wig party, she knew that the cage was secure. She said that she too saw pictures fly off walls, one even smashing on her head at one stage. She wanted to make it go away, so she said that she got our mother's book, the one with the spells, but after trying to find something that would rid this thing, she said that it was just too confusing, so she ended up putting it back. Charity said that she was getting more irritated with the family every day, and sharing a room with Rachel was taking its toll. She said that she was messy and she wanted to have a space of her own, so She went downstairs into the unfinished part of the basement and put her bed between the walls and, of course, took her mice. She told me that she didn't last too long though down there because she saw things that frightened her. She went on to describe what they were and that they were shadows, light-colored shadows taunting her, so she ran upstairs and she ended up sleeping on the couch. All of these events, plus more things that Mum experienced on her own, prompted her to find a highly recommended priest to come and exorcise the house once and for all. He was there for a while as my family stayed outside, but when he came out, he looked pale and he told our mother to move immediately. He said that it's not going to leave and that she should sell that house quickly. I stayed outside with my sister, but when they went into the house to grab our things, they said that it was like something right out of a scary movie. Things were literally broken and tossed everywhere. Clearly, it was angry. My siblings said that as they were walking down the hall, pictures flew off the wall at them and they all ran. We took only our clothes and we went to a motel for the night. We soon moved into an apartment and sent for the rest of our things, and that was that. My mother eventually found out that originally the house was donated to a church many years prior. There had been 2 priests being housed there, and they had their offices set up there as well, and after a few missed events, they were checked on, only to find their decomposing bodies upstairs in the attic, both with their throats slashed, and what they could only describe as like demonic drawings on the walls in the priest's blood, and the killings were thought to be a cult-related one. Mum said that the place was sold 5 times in 2 years before we even got it and moved in, and it's pretty obvious as to why that is. My 10-year-old daughter, well, she sleep talks. Sometimes she'll even sit up and look around a bit. And last night, she dozed off on the couch, and 15 minutes later, she sat up and said, "Where did it go?" I said, "It's okay, honey, go back to bed." She lay down and asked me again where it went. I said, "Go back to sleep." And then I immediately heard a man's voice right in front of me say no. I looked at my daughter and she was asleep again. My husband was in another part of the house in our bedroom asleep, and honestly, I'm still very shaken. There was a man who passed away in our living room in 2017. There was also a man who shot his wife in the head with a shotgun in 1986 in the driveway across the street. We also live by a cemetery, like next door I mean. I never really felt spooked as well until, well, last night, and I haven't slept. The voice was so aggressive, and I just hate this so much. It was close and it was real. I don't know how else to explain it. I've asked my daughter if she ever has dreams about ghosts or sees ghosts, but she said no. I asked if she thought the house was haunted, and she said, "Well, there are the dimes." I forgot about the dimes. Apparently they fall on her. She has so many dimes now because of this too. We rarely use cash though, and she has a reloadable cash card, so we have no idea where they came from. Like, for instance, she'll be in the kitchen and I'll hear a coin hit the floor. She'll say, "Thanks, Jeff," and put it in her bank in her room, and I honestly forgot about all that. I didn't tell her what happened last night because, quite honestly, I think it will terrify her. The dogs too, we have 3 boxer dogs that heard it as well. When I told my husband about what had happened, he asked me if that's why the girls woke him up scratching at the bedroom door trying to get out. They usually all pile in bed with us. I heard them scratching at the door, but not until much later, and I had gotten up after my heart calmed down and decided to go pee once more before crashing for the night. The dogs, though, they never do this. They go to bed when he goes to bed, and they stay there all night. Also, just now my daughter actually said to me, "Do you think people can talk to ghosts?" Do consider that we went to the new Beetlejuice movie after school yesterday, so that could be related, but I said, well, anything's possible. My grandpa always said, if someone said that they saw this or that, never dismiss it because, well, you just never know. My daughter then said, isn't he the grandpa that worked in the Air Force at Roswell's, the alien place? I said, yeah, Roswell. She asked, did he believe in aliens and ghosts? I replied, oh, yeah, he had an author that he loved that talked about supernatural encounters all the time. I cannot remember his name, but my grandma would say that he was crazy when he'd bring this sort of thing up. She said, well, she wasn't lucky enough to see that sort of stuff, I guess. I said, why do you ask? And she said, oh, I was just curious. Also, Jeff, the man who died in our house, he was a nice guy and a bit of a family friend. We've always said Jeff jokingly, and we've agreed that if he were to do anything, that he's obviously nice, if he's leaving us money. The voice I heard was forceful, though, and almost angry. Nothing has happened since then, and my daughter has seemed unfazed. I've also been sleeping a lot better. Well, after a couple of days, that is. So, a little bit of context is that, at the time of this, I was actually being pimped out by my partner. It was early night time, and I was getting ready for work. There were ad posters for me on a couple of different sites, and we had snagged what we thought could be a big fish. I messaged this John for about half an hour before agreeing on a house call. The house was completely across the street, in a very wealthy neighborhood. The John told me to let me know when I arrived. He was working on his PC in an upstairs bedroom or something. My partner and I got into the car and drove to the address provided. He always waited nearby while I worked, but when we arrived at this house, we both felt, well, really uneasy. I messaged the John once I was in the driveway, to no response. I got out and started to approach the door, and my partner came with me. The door was large and made of heavy wood, with a fancy frosted glass window in the center. When I knocked, I realized that it was actually ajar. The hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I slowly pushed the door open wide. The interior of the house confused me further, though. I was faced with a short hallway leading into a grand living space. There was a beautiful fireplace in the center, complete with a crackling fire going. To my left, I noticed a dark doorway. But the strangest thing of all was the lack of furniture. From the front door where I stood, I could see nearly the entire living room. There wasn't even a single chair. No photos on the wall, nothing but the fire in the fireplace. I stood frozen in the doorway for a moment. My partner stepped past me into the house. I started to flee, but curiosity and fear kept me locked in place. He stepped forward and looked into the doorway to the left. He recoiled a bit and shouted, "Hello, hello," a few times. He turned to me and shoved me out of the doorway, and at this point, I found my legs again and sprinted to the car. We drove in stunned silence for a moment until we stopped at an all-night pharmacy. I asked softly, "What was in that room?" He said, very slowly, "An air mattress with 2 people on it, sleeping. Well, I hope." This is something that I experienced at and below the age of 6. It's something that I still think about now as a 37-year-old and have some vivid memories of. So, in the first house I lived in, I shared a room with my older brother. It was a small house with tiny rooms, so we slept in bunk beds with me on the bottom. My parents are somewhere on the hoarder spectrum, and as such, there was a lot of stuff packed into our small room. One item in particular was a stuffed Afghan dog that my mum had made. At the time, it felt like it was huge, and it had a very distinct, pointy face with plastic eyes glued on. It was actually stuffed with old tights and made a distinct noise when you moved it. My mum called it Arabella Afghan, and she stayed at the bottom of my bed with some other toys. To add a bit more context too, I was born in 1987. My maternal grandfather died in 1985, and as such never met any of his grandchildren. I remember my mum speaking about him a lot as a kid, saying how old he would have been when his birthday came around and generally telling us about him. I know that she missed him a lot, and she said to me one day that she had regretted not telling him she loved him before he died. Now, I'm not suggesting that this definitely happened, as I know that the imagination of a child can be very active. However, the events that I'm about to tell you at least felt real to young me. So with all that said, here's what happened. Arabella, she would come to life in the night. I would hear the distinct noise of her moving and bury my head under my pillow so that I wouldn't see her, or she wouldn't see me, and just wait until the noise stopped. One night in particular, though, I woke up and felt like I just wanted to be with my parents, so I got out of bed, made myself as small as possible with my eyes shut, and waited for the noise to stop so that I could run to my parents' room. On this occasion, though, a man's voice said, "You're a good boy," then the noise stopped, and I was absolutely terrified, and I ran. Another night, I heard the noise and looked over the end of my bed. Arabella was looking directly at me, which terrified me, so I immediately hid under my covers. I can still picture exactly how it looked in my mind's eye, too. Her plastic eyes locked with mine. On one very distinct occasion, I remember playing in my room by myself and a man's voice saying something like, "Don't worry," or "You're okay," although there was no one there. My dad was in the Air Force too and spent a lot of time away when I was very young, and during this time I'm fairly sure that he was in the Falklands and there was no other man in the house. I also remember saying to my mum one day, "Sometimes I hear God talking to me," which must have been where my young brain went to make sense of it all. But it's not really something that I talk about to people. This place, though, felt like it was somewhere that I could talk about it from a neutral standpoint. I do like to think that it was connected to my grandfather in some way, not least because it would have come from a place of love for my brothers and mother, especially seeing as I never got to meet him, but to be honest, I really don't know. So I used to be a paranormal investigator as a hobby, and thought that I'd share my most memorable encounter with all of you guys. Now, there was a house in Corinth, New York that I investigated several times, partially because we got more interesting stuff there than anywhere else, but mostly because the woman living there was scared of her daughter. She thought that she might be possessed due to her change in behavior, sudden mood swings, depression, all of that. This family's home had been in their name for generations, and they knew of 2 people who had died in the home. They also believed that, well, many years ago, somebody had performed some type of witchcraft in the attic. Anyway, let me get to the specific encounter. So my team and I were in the kitchen with her doing an EVP session. But we didn't feel much of a presence, and we're getting ready to wrap up the session when suddenly the temperature under the table that we were sitting at felt like it dropped 20 degrees at least. I had a one-touch thermometer with me, so I quickly scanned the air above and below the table, and sure enough, there was a stark difference in the temperature. This woman's mother was one of the people who had passed in the home. In fact, she had died right in the kitchen that we were sitting in, so I looked at the woman and told her that I had a feeling that her mother might be with us, and asked if she had anything she wanted to ask her or anything she wanted to say to her. She started talking. I don't recall much of what she said, but the things I don't remember are sort of irrelevant to this anyway, because what I do remember was when she suddenly paused, looked up and said very softly, "Do you remember that squirrel we used to feed every day? Do you remember what we called him?" Long story short, I reviewed the audio about a week later, after she asked that question. I could see that there was an audio fluctuation, so I queued it up and listened with headphones on full blast to see if I could hear what was said, and it sounded like Nuthead. It took me a few times listening to it to decide that that was definitely what I was hearing. And well, I went back to the house a few days later to go over the evidence that we captured with her. There was other stuff, but not as compelling. But when we got to this audio clip, I took out a piece of paper and wrote "Nuthead" on it and hid it so nobody could see. I played the clip for her and asked her to tell me what she heard. After playing the clip, this woman just literally broke down in tears. Instead of waiting for a response with regards to what she had heard, I put the piece of paper down in front of her for her to read, and she started bawling even harder. Because Nuthead was apparently the name that her mother had coined for this squirrel. We talked to her mother that day in that kitchen. It's pretty wild to think about, and I still get goosebumps as I write about it now. This was probably 20 years ago now, but it's something that has stuck with me all this time. I want to preface by saying that I'm definitely a skeptic. I've had a few different experiences in my life, but this is the only one that I can't definitively logic my way out of. And it's a bit of a long story too, so please bear with me. Now, before I joined the military, I lived in South Florida, about 40 miles south of Tampa. It was around my sophomore year of high school, and we just moved into a new house, and I was a very tired kid. I need to include as well that I was on ADHD and antidepressant medication, as that's the only way that I can explain part of this, but the side effects included drowsiness and, well, go figure, nightmares. It started with almost nothing, to be honest. My dog would walk into my room and I'd say hi, and she'd almost immediately sprint out. One time she just stared at my closet and sort of shook. She's a rescue, so I just assumed at the time that it was some form of anxiety. If she did stay in my room, though, she hated getting on my bed, and if she did, she'd get off after maybe a minute or two, even if I was petting her. After a couple of months, so maybe around Christmas, things started to change, though. I'd come home almost every single day and crash in my room for an hour or two, and during this time I started to have very vivid, even realistic nightmares. The nightmares would start like I was waking up or still lying in bed, and I'd feel my head was super fuzzy, like I was lightheaded all of a sudden. I'd try to sit up and feel crushing weight on my chest. If I wrestled free, I'd try to get out of bed, but all I could do was sit up, like my legs just wouldn't work. I even remember being able to shimmy my way forward like I was crawling out of bed, and something pulled me back into it rather aggressively. This continued for about a month or two, and that's when things got worse. The nightmares evolved to something much worse. So, you know how in dreams you often recognize a place, but it doesn't really at all look like the place? This isn't one of those times. In fact, every detail of my room was exactly how it was normally, only I wasn't dreaming from my perspective, I was sort of looking in. It was a out-of-body experience, I guess you could say, and I would be standing in the middle of my room seeing myself sleep. If my room was messy and, let's say, a red shirt was on the ground before I went to sleep, it was in that exact spot in the nightmare. Backpack by the door, posters on the wall, the whole 9 yards. Anyway, during these nightmares, I'd watch my comforter compress on my chest and feel my breathing become hindered. I'd watch my head on my pillow as it jolted and could feel something hit my face. This particular instance would go on until I graduated high school. Almost every time, my mum would ask why I was such a rough sleeper, because I'd always have red marks on my neck or scratches somewhere. One time, it was so distinct on my neck, I could count the fingers or the marks from them. Ever since I joined the military, and I've been on my ship or my apartment, I've never had any experiences like that, even when I visit my home. I will say this though, I've noticed that my dog, to this day, will not stay in my room for very long at all. give you some context, I'm a 26-year-old woman, best friend of S, also 26 years old. Since her childhood, strange things have been happening with her paternal family, and I have personally witnessed bizarre events on 3 occasions. My best friend S lives part of the year with her uncle on a piece of land where there is a mobile home. Surrounded by several houses and land belonging to her family, S is of Romani descent. She no longer has contact with her parents, who were abusive and abandoned their children, which explains why she's been living with her uncle for several years now. Now, since she was young, S has told me about strange occurrences happening at her brother's or grandmother's and uncle's and even her parents' house. A very tall man sometimes appears at night and regularly watches them. These appearances occur randomly, whether it's raining, windy, snowing in summer or winter. This man, whose face is always unrecognizable, seems to stand in certain spots to spy on them late at night. At first glance, this could be dismissed as a case of stalking, I admit, but what is truly unsettling is that this man has been around for not just 1 or 2 years, but since the childhood of S's aunts and uncles. This man has been tracking them for generations, it seems. The strangest thing of all, though, is that every time someone tries to confront him, it's impossible to get close. The man seems to move away very quickly without running, and sometimes he completely disappears when he is actively searched for. For instance, S's cousin once tried to catch him, but whenever he went out with friends or uncles, this man had completely vanished. What makes this situation even more disturbing, though, is that whenever he appears, there is an intense feeling of discomfort that affects everyone, even those far from the area where he is seen. Now, the first time S saw him, she was 6 years old, and had gotten up to drink a glass of water. She saw a man standing very close to the patio door. To give you an idea of how tall he is, she could only see his shoulders, not his head. She called her mother, who also saw him and was frozen in fear. The family dog at the time began whining. After several minutes, this man backed away and hid or, disappeared. The second time, she was at her grandmother's house when she spotted a very tall, motionless man looking in the direction of one of her uncle's plots. Her cousin, who started having a panic attack, also noticed him too. Her uncles and father tried to approach him, but he quickly moved away without actually running. They still couldn't see his face when they got close too. And the third time was when I was with her at her uncle's place. She heard her dogs whining, and her uncle, who is usually a heavy sleeper, suddenly woke up, grabbed a baseball bat, and went outside trembling to confront this guy. But as soon as he stepped outside, the man seemed to evaporate into the vegetation. The land is a fairly wooded area. Now, here are some questions that I've received, and I'll try to give some answers to them. Why do they think it's the same man? Well, because of his height and the way that he flees. But what doesn't make sense is that it's been happening since the childhood of S's aunts and uncles, so this man should be very old by now. And that's really unsettling to think about, but he's never tried to approach anyone or talk or leave a message or anything. It's just really bizarre. What about the police? Well, they only called the police twice. Being from a Romani background, even though they are settled, they aren't always taken seriously by law enforcement. An investigation was opened at one stage, but it didn't lead to anything. Has no one ever managed to catch him? As mentioned earlier, never. And it's weird too that, despite attempts to chase or confront him and his disappearances, this man still seems to linger around. Why consider something supernatural? Well, S and some members of her family are almost convinced of it. First because of his apparent age, and then because they have never been able to catch him. And despite the investigation, there were no footprints, no DNA, no signs of forced entry, nothing tangible, I guess you could say. What about photos or videos? At night, on land surrounded by forest and without streetlights or city lights, they tried, but you could barely see anything. Even the installation of surveillance cameras was a failure, which reinforced the theory that this man might not be human, according to them anyway. Personally, I am a believer and have seen strange things before, but what happens at my best friend's place from time to time is really frightening, especially the reactions of the dogs who seem to panic as soon as this man is around. This leads me to think that it might be a spirit or maybe a djinn haunting the area. S's favourite uncle thinks that it might not be the same man, but if it is, he's one heck of a degenerate or a pervert is what he says, because to stalk a family for 40 years requires serious determination. So my question for all of you guys is, do you have any idea as to what this is, what his intentions might be, anything? Because that too remains a real mystery. So when I was in my bedroom, my mum was in the living room with the lights off. This happened at around 8:30 p.m. and it's now past 10. My mum heard me come down the hallway and into the kitchen. She asked if I was okay, and she apparently heard a bit of a mumble back in my voice. She said that she didn't know what it said, but after that, the kitchen lit up as if I was using my phone flashlight to find something, and then it was gone. After that, she texted me to ask if I had been out of the living room, so I got up and left my room to talk to her and tell her that I hadn't. I had actually been in my room working on a project for at least the last few hours. So now, we're both freaking out. She kept asking if I was messing with her, and I swore that I wasn't. But we have been experiencing a few things here and there, actually, like strange noises, things moving around. My dad has also had a few of his own experiences. I think one was also about me, so whatever it is, it seems to keep impersonating me. I'm not sure if it's entirely related, but for the past year or so I've been feeling this very off energy around me as well. I've never been able to see ghosts, but I've been able to feel them, I think. Their energies and such, but this one is just off. The only way that I could describe it is wrong, and it's very inconsistent for when it shows up. Sometimes it's gone for a week and it comes back, or it's every other day sometimes, multiple nights in a row, etc. I also really only ever feel it in my room, sometimes elsewhere in the house, and it's always or usually at night anyway. I'm also not sure if they are related, and if they are, I'm not sure how to get rid of this thing, so if you have any advice, I would love it. I'm not a Christian or not religious or anything, so I wouldn't feel comfortable getting the house blessed or anything, which is part of the reason why I'm here. What does anyone do about the paranormal if they aren't religious? One rainy night back in my old apartment, the power went out, and so we bonded through conversations and genuine human interactions, just as we all should, really. One of my friend's demeanors, though, suddenly changed, almost as if he was struck by lightning that froze his soul, and just as instantaneously began to gradually melt away into something that looked like fear. Slowly, he walked into the kitchen, which required a glass door to be slid open to the left before the kitchen hall could be seen. It was a studio apartment. He stared at the direction of the cupboards near the sink for nearly a minute, and due to curiosity and a mix of irritation and anxiety, me and my other friend peeked in to see what he was looking at. We remained silent. I don't remember who went first, but we all eventually ended up chilling back in the room and carried on with our conversations. When we ran out of things to say, I finally said, "You all saw it too, didn't you?" No one spoke, and honestly, that was all the answer I needed. It was a shadowy figure of a man, presumably with a walking stick and a high hat. He was leaned against the countertop, and he appeared to be grinning, I would say. He didn't move an inch or display any hints whatsoever to whatever his intentions may have been, but he was just there. This was in 2002, and a month ago I saw him again. It was only me and a friend who were the last two people awake out of the group of around 7 people. I saw him, and the longer it went, the more the fear in my heart grew. The more he grew in size as well, it seemed. He didn't really grow in the typical sense of the word, though. He grew as, I believe, a direct manifestation of how much fear I perceived him with. My friend saw the terror on my face and told me that he believed me before I even said anything about it. In the afternoon, when everybody was finally awake, one of our friends revealed that another of our friend, a known and respected street dude, also had the same experience and was frozen in fear as a result of what he had seen. I'm wondering, though, is anyone familiar with this entity or what it could be? Why does it appear and what is its usual agenda? It only ever disappears too every time I tell it that I'm not afraid, that I don't fear it, and I must mean it when I say it too, it seems. This only happens at the sight of him, though, and then he disappears slowly into a sort of misty nothingness as he grins subtly and perhaps even sort of giggles, I think. Or at least grins in a giggly manner, I guess you could say. But has anyone else seen or heard of anything like this before? Because I'm wondering if maybe I'm going crazy or maybe there's something going on in my house that I'm just not aware of. This experience is one that I've never shared with anyone besides my brother. When I was about 13 years old, I was living in rural BC. One night I was in the hot tub on the deck outside just watching the woods, taking in the silence. It was winter time and we had just recently had a snowfall that left around knee-high deep of snow. It was around 2 to 3 in the morning and out of nowhere, this large wolf, bigger than one that I'd ever seen by far, came out of the woods. I remember its coat being a shimmering silver and its bright piercing green eyes. As this wolf was walking along the fence of our paddocks, it sort of locked eyes with mine and we just kind of stared at each other as he walked past me, both alone in the middle of the night in the middle of nowhere. But what happened next, till this day, always makes my spine shiver. As the wolf walked past, he walked towards our barn with our horses in it. It became darker as it entered the barn, but the other side of the barn still had a bright light illuminating the outside that I could clearly see. And this wolf, as it entered, halfway through it went from the shape of a wolf to a very large, broad-shouldered person. The horses didn't make a single sound, and this person, that now stood roughly 7 feet tall, rounded the corner towards the open field, but didn't emerge from the other side, and after that I never saw it again. My brother had his own encounter with this same wolf, I think. He told me that he woke up randomly one night from the feeling of being watched. He then looked out of his window to see a very large wolf walking away from his window, so I'm guessing that it was watching him sleep or something. This place that we lived at was old native ground. Our barn was an old schoolhouse where the Catholic priest would put the native children and teach them lessons on Christ and all that. It even had the old desk and chairs inside still. My brother and I saw children's faces in the panes of glass from that barn, and lights turning on randomly too. We had closet doors slam repeatedly for minutes at a time, footsteps and feelings of being watched. In my room I saw glowing red eyes on the ceiling one time, and hid under my covers until morning. Anyway, the main reason why I'm sharing this and what I'm really seeking answers for is, what did I encounter outside in the middle of the night that night? After I looked around myself, the closest thing that I could find was skinwalkers or wendigos, but from what I've read of these creatures, they have deformed features or things that make them uncanny or straight up horrific. What I saw, nothing struck me as abnormal about this wolf besides its massive size, until it literally changed its entire form in front of me. I know that this is getting a bit long, but I'm not a great storyteller, and there's just so much that I experienced at this property that this is really just scratching the surface to everything else. The wolf incident is just something that I've never really been able to grasp and always wanted some kind of an answer for because it feels and sounds just so unbelievable. I know that. I also understand that the term skinwalker is Navajo lore and doesn't really correlate with the BC tribes, but this is just a representation of what I saw with, well, the closest accuracy that I can give you all. I've been living in this apartment for, well, almost a year now, I think, and I haven't had any experiences up until this last week. Things started up on Tuesday night while I was at work. My front door camera went off and there wasn't anyone there. Not that big of a deal, maybe an animal or something. But 15 minutes later and it went off again, but this time my porch light is on. So I checked back through and it was off when I left, off in the next video, and then just comes on again. I checked all of my other cameras inside and out, but there was no one at the house. For the rest of the night, the light goes on and off randomly as I keep checking. About 3 a.m. I turn on the camera and hear what sounds like someone talking, and the light is back on. I continue checking it, and 3:23 the light is off, and my coworker points out movement in the shadow in front of my door. I turn the camera lights on, but nothing there. This continued up until about 4:30, and then the light went off and stayed off. I got home at 7 and my TV was turned on, and that was definitely off when I left. But otherwise, everything was pretty normal. I worked the rest of the week and everything seemed normal as I checked in through the cameras. I had an electrician friend come over and check the porch light out on Friday. It's all good. So tonight, Saturday is my night off and I'm home watching TV. I live alone, so it's just me and the cat sitting in the living room watching TV when I start hearing someone talking. It seems to be coming from my bedroom, which is at the front of the house. Knowing that there's no one here but me, I figure it's outside, so I check the cameras. I don't see anyone around, but it gets quiet, so I figure they must have just went on down the street or something. I settle back in for my movie, and there it goes again. I decide at this point to just sort of ignore it, thinking that it's somebody else passing by. But suddenly, I hear my friend L calling me from my bedroom, but he's not here. He's definitely at work. I mean, I dropped him off myself at 6:45 and he won't be off until at least 7. I went into the bedroom and double-checked, but it's empty. Since then, too, I've heard it 3 more times. My cats have also reached and gone to look down the hallway, but won't go any further. At this point, I've closed the door and am planning on sleeping on the couch tonight because this whole thing is, well, really freaky. I, a 22-year-old female, had a very horrible experience about 2 or 3 years ago. So my boyfriend, 22 and male, and I had been dating for less than a year when this happened. My partner is of a Latino descent and I'm white. My boyfriend's family are believers of the bracelets of the evil eye. They taught me that the evil eye in their culture is used for protection, like if someone gives you a bad look or if they look at you with bad intent or envy. They then taught me that if the bracelet becomes lost or broken, that means that the bracelet has done its job and protected you. Now, my partner and I were hanging out one day at his home when he came across an old evil eye bracelet that used to belong to him. He had lost the bracelet some time before, and he asked me if I wanted it, and he said that it would protect me. From what I understand, someone can gift you their evil eye bracelet, and it should protect you still, even though it had a previous wearer. So I accepted my boyfriend's offer and decided to wear the bracelet, but I didn't really believe in that stuff, I guess. I mean, I grew up Christian, and I still believe in God to this day, and am fairly religious, but not any of that sort of superstitious stuff. In any case, I went home later that day, and I was living with my aunt and uncle at the time. My aunt and uncle are very hardcore religious sort of folks, and so their house felt beyond safe most of the time. I never got any bad energy or negative feelings there, nor did I ever experience anything bad or paranormal too. That night though, I went to bed wearing the bracelet with nothing really in mind. I don't know how long I had been asleep for or what time I woke up, but I remember waking up screaming and thrashing. I can't remember any previous nightmare or dream prior to waking, but As I was waking myself up with my screaming and thrashing, I swear that I felt something grabbing my arm, the arm that I was wearing the bracelet on. I remember that I was grabbing my own arm as well as my other hand, almost as if I was trying to reinforce my other arm that was being grabbed and pulled. I think that I had managed to shake off whatever was grabbing me at the time because as I was really waking up, I suddenly felt something at the end of the bed, and with a hard tug, it tried to rip my blanket off of me. I held onto my blanket firmly and eventually, whatever it was, seemed to let go. I laid there in the pitch black darkness with my eyes wide open, just sort of staring at the ceiling until I felt like it was safe enough to grab my remote control that turned my LED light strips on and off. I turned on the lights and I saw nothing at all. I stayed awake for maybe 10 minutes just looking around and being on my phone, but eventually I was too tired and I fell asleep again. I really don't know how I was able to be honest, but I did, with the lights on, of course. I had never ever experienced anything like this, and there's no way that I could have been asleep or dreaming still because I distinctly remember waking up screaming and sort of thrashing and absolutely feeling something. Now, I don't know if something had been attached to that bracelet or if it was just a crazy coincidence or not, but whatever the case, it was terrifying, and I didn't feel comfortable going home the next day to sleep in my own bed again. The bracelet remained in my home, but I had taken it off for a shower and I didn't put it back on after that. And I never experienced anything again like that, even though the bracelet remained in my home and in my jewelry dish. So, if any of you practice witchcraft or are into the paranormal and culturally practice the evil eye stuff, I would really like to hear your thoughts or speculations as to what you think could have happened. So long story short, my husband and I had heard a horrific car accident while we were camping and getting ready for bed in our tent. It was a super windy, dangerous road that led up to the camping areas, so we were immediately concerned about someone being in grave danger, and potentially with children at that. Without a single word to each other, we hopped up and ran to the direction that we heard the wreck take place. We got there at the same time just about as the police did, and ended up giving our info if needed and heading back to our campsite. Now, I was pretty pregnant at the time, so I really had to pee after all the running and the adrenaline. We decided to stop at the only restroom open at the time, which was a bit past our campsite, and incredibly dark without other campers around creating light. After I used the restroom, I'm walking back out to my husband when I noticed behind him a flash of light frantically bouncing up and down from someone booking it towards the restroom. Jokingly, I chuckled about this guy must really need to use the bathroom or something, but it was a very short-lived moment. This man stopped dead in front of us and basically whispered, "Wow, you guys are fast," and then smiled in the most unnerving way. It absolutely sank my stomach immediately, heartbeat pounding in my ears, instant nausea, goosebumps, you name it. Husband didn't seem put off by any means and noted that we were worried about the accident, etc. Dude continues on as if discussing the weather with a friend, saying that he's just used to this kind of stuff, asks if we're leaving tomorrow. I almost angrily ask, "Used to what?" Which he shrugged off and just explained that he traveled a lot and camped. At that point, I had already started taking steps backwards, to the point there where my husband finally starts noticing something's off with at least me. In the moment, I decided to lie and say that we needed to get back to our tent, because the cops were coming to take our statements, which was completely false, but I, for whatever reason, just fabricated that, like verbal vomit, without even thinking. Even though my husband chimed in and agreed, saying that we needed to get back, this man does not stop. He starts matching our steps backwards with steps forwards towards us, and begins telling us that morning he went for a walk and found these beautiful flowers, but had heard a deep growl which scared him. He ended this very concerning story with saying that he realized that you never know what day is going to be your last. It was at that point that I realized the entire time he had been fiddling with his hands in his hoodie pocket because he had a knife. I screamed run, and without hesitation my husband grabbed my hand and we started running for our lives. In those first few moments of taking off, he asked me what was going on, and I screamed flowers don't growl and started sobbing. This man had never taken the flashlight off of us, mind you, had it on one of his hands by his hoodie pocket the whole encounter, so we knew that he was chasing us when the flashing became erratic again, shining up and down over us. I'll never forget watching our shadows go from big to small from the movement of his hand while running hard. I looked back to see him behind us with the same smile that he had in the beginning, and it absolutely terrified me. We had to cut through some woods because he was gaining on us so fast, and in the heat of the moment decided to just continue through the woods back to the police instead of staying on the road that we would come up to after cutting through. We both looked back and last saw him right at the edge of the road where we would have come out if we had decided to take that way, because it would have been the fastest to the wreck. And seeing that, we knew that we had made the right decision immediately, and knew that it was a life or death situation in that moment. It clicked for us that he had expected us to take the road, and looked disappointed that we had taken the longer route instead. We didn't see the flashlight or him after we looked forward again, and when we told the police, they did go, but they failed to find the guy. Fast forward a couple of years after this traumatic experience, and dozens of unsuccessful follow-up calls to see if they ever found him, I decided to post something on TikTok about it. It actually went viral overnight, and by the next day, someone who had lived in the area had actually found this guy, and shared a news article. He killed 2 weeks later at another campsite not too far from where we went. He attacked and stabbed a man who died immediately, and a woman who luckily survived, but only by playing dead. When I tell you finding this out absolutely sent me into a spiral, man do I mean it. I cannot even remotely begin to describe the mixed emotions of getting closure from him having been found, to the heartbreak and survivor's guilt of knowing that he went on to successfully kill because he wasn't caught after our experience. This changed my life. I'll never be able to enjoy camping again, and we used to love it. Look, please, for the love of all that is good, always go camping or hiking protected. It turns out that camping and hiking and murders are scarily common and seem to be a free-for-all to all serial killers. I mean, really, just look up camping cold cases and you'll be blindsided by just how common it all is. From age 13 until almost 15, I actually had a paper route. I delivered papers to people's doors 6 days a week. All of my customers, aside from occasional grumps and chatterboxes, were absolutely wonderful. Most of them were older, and so many of them were so happy to see me every day, just to have someone to talk to. Many of them would leave me granola bars, water bottles, and even tips at times. Winter holidays were a great time too, because everyone who could left huge tips for me. It was a genuinely pretty good first official job. Eventually, some of the snowbirds moved back and became my customers. One couple, Louise and Gerald, would always stick out in my mind. They started off normal, pretty friendly people, but I noticed one Sunday, the only day that I had to get up early to deliver papers, that Gerald was outside. He chatted me up, which was nothing unusual, and because it was so early and because I'd usually go right to bed after I was done, I was wearing a Britney Spears shirt and a pair of polar bear pajama pants. He complimented and said that I dressed cutely. I was confused though because, well, it was pajamas that I just threw on randomly. I guess I was confused by the compliment, but I just went on about my day and didn't think much of it. Something else to note too is that his wife Louise was always smiling. I couldn't pinpoint why, but it always unnerved me. In retrospect, it gives me the meek and mild and sort of subservient trad wife vibe. Anyway, I had noticed that in their garden there were 3 different dog headstones that all said Fido on it. I was kind of confused as to why they all had the same name, but I figured maybe multiple people had bought them and they wanted to be polite, so they put them out anyways. Now one day, Louise was out and she had a dog with her. She introduced the dog to me, as they had just adopted her, and guess what? They named her Fido. All of the dogs that they had had were named Fido apparently, and they were all Shelties just like that one. I thought that this was a bit weird, and I told my mum about it, and she told me not to be so judgmental, as it was probably one way that they dealt with grief. Here's the thing though, they kept trying to get me to come inside. They'd invite me in for tea, which is not really something people do where I'm from. Coffee and donuts is a little more commonplace, but even that isn't something that people do on a regular basis or anything. Or they'd invite me in to talk to them. I'd always decline politely because I had more papers to deliver anyway and I wanted to go home. Gerald kept complimenting my outfits, even when they were just pajamas. And one morning he did this while getting closer to me and eventually touched my shoulder, and I was eventually like, I gotta go, and I left. I didn't tell my mum at the time, as our relationship was good at that point, and I feared that telling her of any concerns that I had would make her not trust me or make her mad or something. This was also at the tail end of my CSA, which she doesn't really know about to this day, and I thought that maybe I was just being paranoid. But then, right before I moved and I gave up my paper route, a really bizarre incident happened. It was a Sunday, the last Sunday that I had the paper route to be exact. So I was out early delivering papers, like it was still kind of dark out, and Gerald was outside. He complimented my outfit again, getting all creepily close. He invited me inside and I said, I really don't think my mum would appreciate me being gone for longer than she expects me to. She's really strict, you know. Which wasn't the whole truth, but, I mean, you gotta do what you gotta do, right? He seemed to get kind of annoyed by that, though, and just asked, wouldn't your mum just prefer that you respect your elders and not turn down an invitation? And at that, I felt the color drain from my face, and I noped out of that really quick. I think I muttered something about how I really had to hurry along because my dog was sick or something. I heard him say some compliments about how my hair looked pretty. I have very wavy, sort of curly hair that gets very puffy and voluminous when I'm in the humidity, and he would bring that up a lot, saying that my hair reminded him of the 80s. In any case, I booked it as quickly as I could to the next house without running. I didn't see Gerald after that, but I did see Louise, and she never stopped inviting me to come inside and play with Fido or to have some tea. I always declined, and she always seemed disappointed every time. And so, that's my weird paper route story. I know that maybe I'm just being paranoid, but Gerald and Louise, they just gave me some really funky vibes. And looking back, I really hope that those graves did actually contain old pets. I recently went on a date with a guy from my school who I met on a dating app. He seemed super sweet and charming over text, so I agreed to go on a date with him, especially after 2 friends told me that they knew him from a class where he was genuinely a funny guy. Well, we go to a small, pretty, prestigious university, which also made me sure that he would be normal. He was supposed to meet me at 6 to go out on a picnic, but ended up picking me up at about 8:30. He texted me to reschedule to 8 and ended up showing up at that time too. He drove me to his apartment, and although uncomfortable, I agreed to go in because of everything that I already knew about him. The apartment was only lit with 1 candle, and a small glowing light on the floor, which didn't really add much. It was a multiple bedroom apartment that he lived in alone, which made it even more odd, I guess. In any case, we talked and ate some food, and he seemed sort of nervous and uneasy for most of it. He suddenly switched the conversation to our deepest, darkest secrets, and asked if I had ever seriously thought about killing anyone. After I said no, he He made up a story about being in the Navy and having to bomb a ship and killing 5 people. When I was unsure how to respond, he sort of just passed it off as a joke and said that he had seriously thought about killing someone else, his ex's current boyfriend allegedly. I was extremely uncomfortable at this point and wanted to leave, and he agreed to drive me home. Before we left though, he said that he wanted to show something to me and pulled out a rifle that he pointed in my direction. When I got startled, he remained eerily calm and said that he got it for hunting but couldn't think of even killing an animal. We left and I got back to my friend's place safely. Now, everyone I've told this has been flabbergasted about how the date went, and I just cannot shake the feeling that something was off about him, and it's creeping me out. To clarify too, I mean like something more sinister about him. So, if you have any thoughts, then it would be much appreciated. A series of events unfolded in my life, causing me to move out and live out of my car ever since about a month ago. It's nothing really new for me, however, as I've lived out of my car for 5 years prior in the past, and have never had any encounters. Until yesterday, that is, because something happened which really shook me up. There's this small beach on the coastline, which has been my go-to sleeping spot for some time. On the southbound part of the road is a whole lineup of cars and RVs, mainly other homeless, but also people coming to hang out because it offers a nice view of the bay. I usually sleep on this side, and the people who come here like to bring their beers, play their music, and gather outside. But it's super chill and everyone keeps to themselves for the most part. Well, lately I've been having trouble sleeping, and I tend to knock out at around 2 a.m.-ish, not waking up till noon. The problem is, though, on this southbound side, is that the sun will bear down at like 8 a.m., turning my car into a sauna in the morning. But about 100 yards down, on the northbound side, there's this tiny hiking trail area in the vast lot just off the road, and there's a few trees there which offer me a bit of shade until the afternoon. There's also a park right across the street from here. It's a much more secluded area, but I've been sleeping there since the last week or so, no issues at all. In fact, typically, only a couple of other cars really park around this area. So, yesterday, I pulled up to my spot at around 12:30 in the morning and found this large 4x4 pickup truck parked there. There's another car parked across the road and a third one on the other end of the lot as well. I think to myself, no biggie, there's a second tree just in front of the pickup which works for me, so I'll pull up there. It's only a 20-foot distance between us, and I am in their direct line of vision. I realize now in hindsight that it was probably a stupid move, but oh well. There's 2 people in the front seat playing their ranchero music, and there's also a dog left outside on a leash, possibly others in the back seat, but I couldn't confirm due to the windows being tinted. I never make eye contact and keep my head down the entire time. I first go to take a leak in the forest, come back to grab my pillows and blanket from the trunk, and hop into the back seat. I'd assume that they would have thrown off any paranoia that they would have had as they see that I'm just coming to sleep in for the night. Within 5 minutes, though, they take off and drive up the road for a short distance before suddenly making a U-turn and returning back into the lot. They do some weird random driving in front of me, then pull back slowly and very close to my side. I roll down my window. The passenger has his window all the way down. He's asking me something in Spanish and his English is basically nil. He's clearly drunk, coked up, bloodshot eyes, pupils dilated, and talking in a slight slur. He's also visibly angry, expressing intimidation via body language. I respond to him in English, so he asks if I'm Policia, and I'm like, "No man, I'm just sleeping here." I show him the pillow and the blanket, but he keeps pressing me. No, police come here." I reply, "No man, police no come here. Never, don't worry about it." I tuck my hand under my head as per the universal sign language of sleeping, again reiterating that I'm here to sleep. But he's getting frustrated and asks where I'm coming from. I'm trying my best to de-escalate the situation and talk calmly and nicely and even apologize if I happen to bother them. I directly asked him, "Do you think that I'm police?" And he responds in the negative, shaking his head. I point up to the tree and explain, "Shade for the morning, my car," just so that he knows why I decided to park in this spot. But he's pretending not to understand me and says, "Policia come here." Again, I tell him, "No man, police don't come here. I sleep here every night, it's okay." But the dude is angry now and starts halfway flashing something in his hand from behind the car door. It was a very subtle gesture, and I could not say for sure if it was a gun, but he was definitely suggesting something. He then says, "After today, no more sleeping here," repeating this 2 times, then goes, "Okay, okay," while pumping his chest and piercing his gaze in a menacing fashion. The driver floors the gas pedal, taking off in a frenzy. As they're taking off, the passenger dude hangs out the window looking back and mugging the living heck out of me before they get back on the road, hitting the accelerator at high speeds. I sat there for a good 10 minutes just so that I don't run into them a second time, then went to sleep near a Walmart instead. I didn't get their license plate, but since they likely also have my plate and know what I look like, it'd probably turn sour for me if I reported them anyway. I spent the whole day dwelling on what had happened yesterday and have little clue as to what made them trip out like this. My only plausible theory is that they didn't like me parking proximally to them and they took it as a disrespect. In any case, it's a bit of a bummer because, well, there goes my perfect parking spot. So I was camping with a couple of friends at a spot on the McLeod River called Adena. If you haven't been, it's a pretty neat spot but very remote. McLeod town is small and Adena is about 14 miles into the woods, 7 of which are a rocky dirt road into a canyon with a beautiful pristine opal blue river at the bottom. The site was an old summer pack-in camp for a wealthy San Francisco family in the 1800s. There are still foundations of the buildings, an old chimney and the remnants of an orchard even. Now, the campground is right on the river and we went, as most do, to fly fish. It was early spring and the river was really too full and fast to do much useful fishing on this trip, which is likely why we were the only people down there. Anyway, on the first day there, after no luck fishing, my buddy and his wife decided to take a snooze in their camper, so I walked up the river a bit to try and find a spot to fish where maybe the river wouldn't widen out and be more workable. I walked through the old ruins and through the orchard before finding a trail to head upriver. I fished unsuccessfully for about 45 minutes, and it started to rain a little bit, so I packed up and headed back. Right as I was coming off the trail, though, and back into the orchard area, there was an archway of vegetation that I had to duck a bit under to get through to get back into the old orchard. And right as I ducked in, I heard, coming through the dense foliage, a few feet above my head and no more than 10 feet, what sounded like a horse pushing air out through its cheeks. It was a deep guttural sound from a large animal, and it sounded close enough to almost touch it. I could see nothing though because the vegetation was so dense, but I got real cold real fast and moved out of the thick stuff into the more open orchard. And then I froze. I could hear nothing. I couldn't see anything in the brush. I was kicking myself because I was carrying a sidearm, but it was in my pack, which I was an idiot for doing that. Slowly though, I took off my pack, put it on the ground, and I got my gun. I put on my shoulder harness and packed back on as slow and easy as I possibly could, the whole time intensely focused on the sound, but I didn't hear anything. This orchard is about the size of a football field, and the right side of which, where the sound had come from, is dense blackberries. So basically there's this open space, then the dense woods and the berry area where you can't really see much. I started walking back through the orchard towards our campsite, At the opposite end had a similar kind of dense arch-like spot to get out of the orchard and back into the ruin or campground area. I had made considerable ground and was intensely listening for sounds of something following me and had heard nothing. And as I made my way, I was starting to feel like I was in the clear. And right as I let a little bit of a sigh of relief out while going through the exit arch, there was that same sound from a similar height, and just as close as before. At that, I instantly broke into a full sprint the rest of the way back to the campsite, and informed my friends quickly. It was honestly a really wild experience, and as I was running, I felt like my life depended on it. Anyway, that night we all decided to stay down there in any case, and yeah, as we were cooking and eating, a deer showed up. The strange part was that as it got darker, the deer kept getting closer. By the time that we were ready for bed, it was literally under the picnic table in the campsite. We had a pretty uneventful night for the most part, but when we got up in the morning, the deer had slept under the pop-up camper right at the door. The next day, we went back to the orchard with our firearms ready. I was determined to figure out how the animal had moved without me hearing it through the dense berries. I searched and searched, and in the end, I just could not come up with a rational explanation. I mean, there were no paths, no trails. But lastly, and most disconcerting, in the middle of the orchard there was a small pine tree, maybe about 12 feet tall. But the weird part was that something had broken the top off of it, about 7 feet up, and laid it across the vague footpath that I had just used to get through the orchard the day before. And I can assure you that it was not there then. I've racked my head trying to make sense of this encounter for some time now. I mean, a bear obviously comes to mind, but what I get stuck in is the height of where the sound came from. Black bears getting to like 9 feet tall is not really a thing, and an animal that size, having to move pretty quickly to cut me off, does not seem possible over that distance through that thick of the brush without a trail. I'm a touch over 6 feet as well, and this noise was a few feet above my head. The terrain just would not have accounted for that, plus a bear standing up. Impossible. The other thing too is that I just don't understand how it could have cut me off at the other exit and made no sound getting there through the dense berries and the trees like that. I was absolutely terrified, and I don't think I've ever been listening more intensely in my life, but there was just no sound. I mean, I guess it could have been 2 huge bears, one at each spot, but I've never heard a bear make those sounds before. The deer issue was also really strange. That animal seemed really spooked and felt safe by us, and I've never seen that before. Anyway, it's a cool spot, and if I was Bigfoot, that's where I would be, considering the orchard food source and limited humans for the majority of the year. I'm not saying it was that by any means. Really, I have no idea what it was, but I'm sort of convinced now that there was something weird going on there, for sure. So my family and our friend, 1 male, 2 female, our kid and newborn, just went on a walk through a trail near our friend's dad's house. What was supposed to be a nice outing started to get strange though when a group of what felt like 40 but was probably more like 20 walked past us, most of them wearing the color white. We just think of this as a bit strange, but we continue through the path anyways. But then, all of them, instead of leaving, decide to turn around and start catching up and walking behind us. Now, I've walked this trail often enough to know the general area, but we get a bit spooked amid their group's excitement, and decide to walk into a path that's not really a trail, but we can hide behind. We wait for a bit, hearts racing, and I hear a small group on a path above us that would have ended up leading them to cutting us off halfway through the trail. I specifically heard them say something in a sort of questioning manner as well, and about the 4 of them. We continue waiting a bit until the group on the main path passes, and then we quickly head back the way that we had come and safely got away. This obviously just happened, and I'm still convincing myself that we were just overthinking it, but we had actual fear, and the whole situation felt very strange, especially because, well, they cut us off the trail, and honestly, the way they were dressed, they looked like, I don't know, maybe a cult. So this was about 3.5 years ago, but I think about it pretty much every day. I'll start by saying that I was not being very smart, and I know that. So, I was in Miami with a friend, who was now my boyfriend, and we were vacationing or blowing off some steam. I was 28, he was 25. We are both gay, and I decided to download Grindr and see what was going on. Long story short, I met a guy and went to his place for some fun. We had at it, and I had a good time, and we had some drinks. I was feeling great. It was about 11 p.m. at night, and time to wrap up and head back to the hotel. I saw that it was about a mile walk, literally straight down the road, so I head out. And well, I had taken some Adderall and was feeling a little more reckless than I normally am, and decided maybe I would hook up with somebody else. I know, but I log back on Grindr and instantly connect with a really hot guy. He invites me over, gives me his address, and also says that he could come and pick me up. So I'm just standing there on the edge of this sidewalk, wondering if I'm going to get picked up, or call an Uber to this location, or just go home. And someone pulls up in a truck and says that they're here to pick me up. I'm like, oh wow, you came, that's really nice. I literally remember looking at the picture and at the guy and feeling very confident that they were the same person, so I hopped in the truck. Instantly, though, I just had the weirdest feeling rush over me. The truck smelled weird too, first of all. I don't know how to describe it, but it was like the taste of licking iron, maybe. I was instantly turned off and felt really weird about that, though. Anyway, he starts driving. Thankfully, I didn't close out the Grindr app too when he pulled up because it was so abrupt, because I looked down and literally noticed that I'm getting further away from the guy that I was talking to, which means that they were not the same person. But this guy looked exactly like this person. But the weirdest thing was that this guy looked exactly like the person's profile. I remember that I just started texting and talking, being like, I really like your blonde hair. Your grey truck is really cool. Is this a 2014 Chevy Silverado? I just told my friends about you and have to be home by 12 p.m, just FYI. But we can go to my hotel. They'd love to meet you if you'd like. Trying to make it seem like I have people waiting on me, that I disclosed parts of his identity, anything really. This lasted about 2 to 3 minutes until, eventually, he just pulled over and said that he wasn't feeling like hanging out anymore. I got out and he left, and I got in an Uber and went home. To this day, though, I really do think that I was picked up by someone who saw an easy target. But thankfully, I was slightly resourceful in the moment, enough to get me out of, well, whatever that was. I was in Venice this time last year, and I still cannot get my head around how and why this happened. So I was there for 3 nights. It was my first time in Venice, and I loved it. I was there with friends, but due to our poor planning, all 4 of us stayed in different hotels. I chose one near the station, which was an intimate hotel ran by a religious family. It was a classic old villa facing a canal, and the place had a chapel as well, a garden, and full of religious merch and decorations throughout. My room was on the 2nd floor. You had to climb 3 sets of stairs, and on the top you were met with a marble square lobby with a round table in the middle. There were 4 rooms around this lobby, and the rest of the rooms continued on two corridors that stretched on either side of the lobby. My room was one of the rooms attached to this lobby, a single room that looked over the canal. It was a simple, small room composed of a single bed with a cross above the head, a basin, and a wardrobe. It was a cheap and cheerful hotel, and I slept like a baby the first 2 nights I was there. But on my third and final night, I had trouble getting to sleep, and the loud neighbor who was watching videos didn't help, but I had to bang on their wall around 1 a.m., after which they stopped and I fell asleep. But I remember feeling uneasy and agitated that night for some reason. I eventually woke up sometime around 3:30 to 4:30, which wasn't unusual for me as I don't sleep that well. But that was when I heard a group of loud wailing people in the building. It echoed into my room via the hall. At this point, I remember thinking that the source of this noise was either coming from the stairs or the bottom of it. I was initially annoyed, thinking that there were a bunch of drunkards who came in after night out or whatever. Then it suddenly hit me that the hotel had a 12 a.m. curfew. It was unlikely a group of people suddenly coming out of their rooms to cause a commotion as well. Eventually, I came to my senses, which made me more aware of this mysterious wailing. It was loud, almost in despair, and crescendoed over and over, echoing into the lobby. I eventually realized that this was, or they were, definitely not human. It's hard to explain, but something in me knew by the sound that whatever this was not alive, in one form or another, and humans could just not really make this noise. I have never, ever felt like this before, and it was a strange experience, but then the wailing finally stopped. I was relieved, but what happened next is something that I will never forget. The sound resumed, but this time from the foot of my bed. This thing, or these things, were wailing in my room at the foot of my bed, very much present, closer and louder. I don't know what happened after that, because as soon as I heard them, I just blacked out or passed out, and I woke up on the floor at around 7 in the morning. To my surprise, I didn't feel as scared until later on in the day, where I tried to recap what on earth happened. To this day, I still cannot explain what this was. I wasn't a paranormal enthusiast or believer, and believed I would stay this way until proven wrong, I guess, but I'm pretty easily spooked, I suppose, and always thought that I'd end up crying or screaming if I encountered a ghost. My theory is that my body just went into extreme fear after this thing came into my room and simply shut down, hence the passing out. I do think about this pretty often though, and I always get chills when I think about it. I'd love to hear what everyone here thinks about this though, thoughts, theories, etc. I've never gone back to that place, and I don't intend to either. But if you live around there, or if you've had any experience with things around there, then I would love to know. This happened to me last year. So I was up late working on an art project in my living room, the windows wide open. I lived in the first floor apartment. Very often too, I felt as if something or someone was watching me, and it knew that I knew, and I got the feeling that I was not supposed to know, if that makes sense. It felt like someone was directly outside of my window though, staring straight at me, unwavering. Anyway, it was probably about 1 or 2 in the morning at this point when I heard what sounded like a very distant cry for help from a woman. This calling was so quiet that it was just barely audible. That's how far away it sounded. But at the same time, I couldn't shake this eerie feeling that it was actually quite close. It was really confusing, and I chalked it up to exhaustion and that it was probably all in my head. But then, just as the screaming stopped, I heard a voice, so clear, so close, so haunting, whispered directly into my ear. I could almost feel their cold breath, and it said, "I know you can hear me." This voice, although only a whisper, echoed throughout the room. It was so articulate as well. I mean, there was no mistaking that it was a message whatsoever, undeniable, and that whatever this thing was, it was right there next to me, and I could hear it. Every now and then I think about this, and it always chills me to the bone, even a year later afterward. This was like nothing I'd ever experienced in my entire life, and even now I can't fully articulate the fear that shook me to my core because of this. The juxtaposition of it all too, like the distant screams were so quiet, but that was the loudest whisper that I'd ever heard, and I can assure you that there was absolutely nobody there. I want to tell my sister's potentially paranormal story from about 4 years ago. It's the most potent story that I've heard from somebody that I know personally. So, she was working in the cafe at Chawton House in Hampshire, UK, a Grade 2 listed manor house. It has a Wikipedia page if you want to check it out. It was the evening, I must have been working an event or something, and she was upstairs alone when the door— now, this is a big 300-plus year old heavy wooden door, so I think we can discount the wind catching it— swung open and closed again, except nobody walked in. What makes it creepier is that this door is key-coded, so there's really no way of opening it unless the code is typed in. Clearly this made my sister slightly nervous, as she had heard that the house was haunted before, but she carried on with what she was doing on the till. But then, the till started working by itself, buttons being pressed erratically, and whatever she did, she just couldn't stop it. At this point, she started to really panic. She hates the paranormal. When the manager walked in, she took my sister outside into the yard to try and calm her down and explain the old classic, "Oh yes, that's Lady XYZ of the house, and she likes to roam the floor," when all the old-style outdoor lights in the yard started to dim and come back again. Well, that was the last straw for my sister, so she told the manager, to heck with this, handed over her apron and bolted down the long driveway back to her car in the dark. I asked her, weren't you scared to run down that driveway in the dark after all of that? And she replied, "No, I just wanted to get the heck away from that place." It's something that we still talk about often, and whenever I think about it, it always bothers me. So, I'd like to tell you about an experience that I had recently that honestly disturbed me. I don't know if it was real, a nightmare, or something else, but I cannot explain it. So first of all, you need to know that my bedroom and my mother's bedroom are opposite each other. So from my door I can see my mother's bedroom, which is at the end of the corridor. What's more, my window faces my door and therefore my corridor. It was the middle of the night and the moon was shining brightly that night, so it was quite easy to see the bedroom and the corridor without too much difficulty. During the night, I woke up and was facing my window, curled up on top of myself. That was when I saw a face opposite my bed that I could well describe to you. It was a young man, I'd say in his 20s, with a fairly thin face and hollow cheeks. He had red hair, short with curls on top. The most terrifying thing about him, though, was that he was looking towards my bedroom door with a horrified look frozen on his face. I mean, he didn't move an inch, as if it was a painting that I was seeing, but he looked so real. At that moment, I had a feeling of terror that ran through my body. I was still curled up, and I didn't dare move or turn around towards my door, where the young man was looking. My body was telling me not to move, my eyes were glued to the side, and I just couldn't move. My body froze, and I felt sick to my stomach, and I had the feeling that if I moved, something serious was going to happen. I stayed like that for a few minutes, and then at one point, it was completely calm. The young man was gone, and it was quiet. Maybe a little too quiet, actually. Like the calm you feel when you realize what had just happened. After that, though, I couldn't contain myself from turning back towards my corridor, and that's when I caught sight of a silhouette. It was transparent, but it was as if you could see the outline of its silhouette. It's hard to explain, but the only thing that I know is that when I looked at this thing, I didn't feel at all comfortable, and I was even a little bit scared. After all of that, I didn't look far and went back to sleep as if nothing had happened. It wasn't until the next day that I thought about it again, and I spoke to my mother about it, but she couldn't come up with an explanation either. And that's why I'm here. Do you guys have any idea what this could have been? So this happened about 4 years ago. I used to live in a very rural part of NC, in the Triad foothills area. I was about 17 at this time, and my house was in the woods, about a football field's length away from the road, which wasn't a major one, just a back road. We did have neighbors, I guess, one on one side, and they were pretty close, separated by maybe 10 yards and some trees, but the other side, there's a few acres between us and the nearest house. Behind our house was acres and acres of fields and woods, and there was also a pond down there as well, which is important for later. Now, we had a dog at the time, and he had a sort of lot that we would put him in at night to sleep in. It was nestled in the very edge of the woods, about 100 feet from our house, and it was about 7 or 9 at night, and it was winter. Probably January to February, but I don't remember exactly. What I do know is that the holidays were over, though. I was taking our dog out to the lot that night as well. I had his metal bowl in one hand and the phone in the other. I got about halfway to his lot and suddenly just felt really weird. I did freak myself out taking him out sometimes, so this wasn't particularly extraordinary or anything. I shined my flashlight on the edge of the woods, near to his lot, where it sloped down a little bit and was further into the woods. When I did this, I saw glowing white eyes looking back at me. They must have been about 3 feet to 3.5 feet off the ground. My mind deduced that it couldn't have been a squirrel or a small animal, so I immediately yelled for our dog, dropped his food bowl, which made an extremely loud racket, metal on concrete, and just ran inside. I came in freaked out, saying that I saw something in the woods and I was not going back out there. My mum said that I was being dramatic and that it was just a deer and she would go out with me. I felt very confident after the racket that I'd made that whatever it was, it would have left by now, and so I went with her to take him back out. We walked out and I shined my light where the eyes were, and the eyes were still there, just as bright, and stared right at us. My mum got freaked out now and we both ran inside again. She came in and told my stepdad that I was right, and was freaking out, saying that there was a man sitting down there in the woods. My stepdad then went out there with a real flashlight and a gun, and we followed. He shined it back in the spot where the eyes were. He yelled, "Hey," real loud, and this is when I got the best look at it. The eyes were 100% about 3 feet to 3.5 feet off the ground. Whatever it was, it stared right at us and then walked sideways, not breaking eye contact, very fluidly, and then went off into the woods. Mind you, we never heard a sound. No leaves breaking, no twigs snapping, nothing. Never saw anything like it since then, and every time I took my dog out, I never saw anything like that again, despite checking every time. Now, before anyone asks, I don't know how my dog was acting. At the time, I was just too scared to pay any attention to it. I do know that he sometimes eats possums and skunks that fall into the lot, and would bark at other stuff like deer and foxes. The whole encounter, he was silent though, and seemed to just run inside with us and stayed close with us. The land behind the house, I'm almost certain, is native land. Way behind the house, up on a hill overlooking the pond, are stones in the ground, about 2 or 3 with markings on them. With certainty, I can say the inscriptions are definitely old, and are of a form of writing. They're very weathered, not fresh at all, and are precisely drawn lines with parallels and equal spacing between markings and all that. We've also found arrowheads in the area. We jokingly called it the Indian burial ground, but from my research, natives in NC rarely practice burial like this with headstones, so I'm really not sure what it is, but I'm pretty certain that it is native, if not older. Now, the pond, I always got a weird vibe down by the pond fishing, always. It was a natural pond or spring, but my stepdad turned it into a larger pond, and we had cows and stocked it with more fish and all that. There's a large slope that you have to walk down, surrounded by baby pine trees on each side. There's a small circle area right before you go down the hill to the pond, and in this clearing we used to find a lot of bones. I mean a lot. There'd be 3 to 4 piles of fish and snake bones neatly in a pile, normally all missing the head part. This pond is not close to where I had the encounter by any means. It's closer to the other side of the property, if anything, but still on our property, so yeah. But back in this area where I get the weird vibes, my stepdad has old fence posts separating his land and the neighbors. It's an overgrown field or pasture on one side, and straight woods on the other. The neighbors did come back here sometimes, but normally just to ride ATVs. Anyway, one day in the summer I went back there with friends, and in the very back line of the property was a crow's head stuck on the fence post. It was really freaky, and because of that we dipped. I've seen this before at my grandpa's house too. That time when I saw it, it was on a fence post around his garden, and he told me that you do that if crows eat your garden and they'll just stay away. However, when I saw it at our house, there has never been a garden anywhere near that fence post or close to that area at all. Anyway, I'm sharing this story mainly because I'm curious as to what you guys think it is. I can assure you that this creature wasn't any small critter like a squirrel or a raccoon or a deer or anything. I've debunked these myself because the eyes were too big and too high to belong to any small critters, and a deer would 100% have run away after all the racket and noise that we had made, and my stepdad yelling too. I mean, we saw deer routinely, and they're all very skittish as they're prey animal, right? The only animals I can think of that it could be would be a black bear, maybe a mountain lion or a bobcat. I lean more towards feline because it moved extremely fluid and smooth. The issue with this though is that mountain lions aren't found in NC, and bobcats are native but would be too small to fit the height of the eyes. A black bear is plausible, I guess, but also very, very rare to find in this area that I live in. You find them mostly in the mountains, if anything. Also, I would think that a black bear would make more noise like grunts and not move so fluidly like that. And like all animals really, they would have made much more noise moving away. It's a small community and everyone knows everyone pretty much, and everyone in that area hunts. There's a lot of game trails out, and usually when someone spots something out of the ordinary, like a bear or a bobcat or a big buck or whatever, it's the talk of the town, but no one's ever mentioned seeing something weird in the area at the time. But like I said, I'm curious as to what you guys have to say about this encounter. I added the info about the native land and the crow head and the pond, just in case these are any signs of cryptids or whatever, and could be useful in identifying it, if it is paranormal, that is. I mean, I admit that it could be completely coincidental and not related, but I just thought that it could be potentially important. So, if you have any questions or feedback, then shoot them my way and let's try and figure this out.